Hello, everyone. Thank you for attending this Wireless Broadband Alliance virtual Congress. We've been hosting a series of webinars over the last 2 weeks, addressing this theme of how Wi-Fi connects the world, and today is our final installment. I'm Steve from the WBA. I'm responsible for our memberships and industry engagements. We pride ourselves on driving the ecosystem forward for Wi-Fi and also giving our members a platform to contribute and develop their businesses. I'm very pleased to be here today, moderating today's session. It's about how to transform public and guest Wi-Fi. Also very thankful to our sponsors. From left to right, we have Boingo, Cisco, Intel, Global Reach, Aptilo, Asia, Cognitive, Huawei, Juniper, Net Experience, OnSemi, Single Digits, Sterlite, and Y-Connect. Big thank you for making today possible. Also, we are very fortunate to not only have a very good-looking bunch of speakers, but also guys that are also very versed and experienced in this field. We have Matthew McPherson, CTO from Cisco Wireless, Raj Gujrani, who's Director of Orion Wi-Fi, Chris Bruce, Managing Director from Global Reach Technologies, Kishore Raja, VP of Engineering and Strategy at Boingo Wireless, Blaise Vapedic, CTO at Single Digits, Jonas Bjorkman, CTO at Atilo Networks, Bob Friday, CTO of Juniper Networks, Brian Jacks, CEO of Y-Connect, Bernard Hoskovy, CEO and founder of Net Experience, and finally Yang Ji, who's Vice President for Campus Networks at Huawei Technologies. Okay. So I think the agenda, as you can see, it's pretty packed. But before we jump in to all of these topics, we always think it's a good idea to understand who's out there in the audience, and also understand, what's important to you as far as Wi-Fi topics are concerned. So we wanted to just run a short poll. So first question here, we'd like you to just tell us what type of organization you're from. Are you a network operator, enterprise with a public Wi-Fi estate, hardware, software vendor, roaming hub, or identity provider? Okay. And then the second question, so what are the 3 biggest challenges in your organization when it comes to Wi-Fi innovation? Or sorry, where Wi-Fi innovation can help? The user onboarding, first time and between hotspots, quality of service, security, data, privacy, and identity management, monetization and network costs, and then finally network implementation and management. Okay, so let's just give that a minute and let's take a look.
First poll is showing, Steve, in terms of the results.
It's not coming up for me, Sarah. I'm just trying to see where it's. I can't see it come through, Sarah.
Okay, let me just summarize then. We've got 36% network operators, 38% are hardware and software vendors. We've got 10% are enterprises from the public Wi-Fi estates and roaming hubs, and 5% from identity providers.
Okay, thank you. So yeah, so I think it's a pretty healthy representation from network operators, and enterprise seems to be equally split. So you're in the right place.
I'll share the second poll, Steve.
Thank you.
Yep. And the results are coming through. Are you able to see the results this time, Steve? Sorry.
I can't. No, I'm not sure what's going on. Could you? Okay.
Yeah, we've got 71% says the biggest challenge is user onboarding. The second is monetization and network costs. The third is security, data privacy, and identity management, followed by quality of service at 37% and network implementation and management at 20%.
Okay. Yeah. So wow. So I guess a sort of strong lead towards user onboarding. So I think that bodes well again for today's agenda, and I also know the panel session as well. So yeah, interesting. Okay, good. So just scrolling back up, let's just in terms of the topic in hand here as well. I think just to sort of set the scene, let's just think about where we are today and when it comes to, I guess, some of the challenges that we face when it comes to Wi-Fi. And I think, unfortunately, some of this, is what we see globally, but certainly issues when it comes to security, some high-profile breaches that we've seen in the press with regards to Wi-Fi. And I think also we can all sympathize on a personal level sometimes with the user experience, as the poll just showed, some of the issues that we have with connecting to Wi-Fi. Quality of service, coverage, bandwidth speeds, and so forth, and then also sort of having good coverage and capacity. Okay. Yeah, so interesting, I think, as well. I think, again, we should probably get started just in the interest of time. And what I'd like to do first is hand off to our first speaker, Matthew McPherson, who's CTO from Cisco Wireless. So Matt, over to you first. I believe you and Raj Gajwani are going to share the floor and be talking about building seamless and secure interoperable Wi-Fi.
That is correct. Thank you, Steve. Let me try to share my screen here. So just make sure. Okay. I'm getting a second error. Give me a second. Let me try it again.
We are seeing your slides,
You can
Matt.
see it's screen. You're not on full screen yet, but we can
see it
yeah.
now?
Yeah.
Okay, good. I had for some reason, I had to switch screens. Okay. All right. Are you seeing presenter or notes?
We're seeing the, you're not in presentation mode just yet. We're still seeing the.
Okay, how about now?
No change just yet. We're still seeing the slides down the side.
Still slides down the side?
Yeah, that's right. You could perhaps just make them smaller, or I'm not sure if it's not.
Let me try one more time. All right, let me share. How about now?
No, it's still changing. I mean, you can just see the sort of yeah, that's better. Okay, so I think you're there now, but you've still got the. Oh, it's changed. Now it's blank, Matt.
Okay, so maybe what we'll have to do, it's for some reason it's giving me a weird attribute. So maybe I have to get you guys to share it from your side.
Okay. Should I take the screen back and then I can scroll through?
Okay.
Okay. Over to you.
All right. Thank you. That's all right. So good morning, everybody, and apologies for some of the technical difficulties. Hopefully, we can proceed now forward without any difficulty. So what we wanted to talk to you today, I'm here together with Raj from Google. I think a lot of folks have had an opportunity to meet Raj. He's one of our newest board members over at WBA, and we wanted to talk about open roaming and extending open roaming into new business cases, especially as a platform in order to provide for very simple and very easy billing and mediation. So if we go to the next slide, Steve. So I think folks are familiar with open roaming, but just a couple of quick comments. And you've seen me present before where it becomes very obvious very quick that when we talk about roaming, and we talk about roaming especially into venues like enterprise and public venues, and actually going into guest areas in carpeted enterprise, there's hundreds of millions of different access networks out there. And so what we're doing with the Open Federation, the Open Roaming Federation, is providing this abstraction so that it's extremely simple for these enterprises, these public spaces, these venues to join into that federation. I've shown some statistics on this in the past. There's well over 400 million different guest access networks. And so as we go forward with this ability to roam, it becomes very important that we make it a very simple thing to do wherever we go. Not only simple to the user, but simple to the IT department that might be running a private network to be able to join that federation. Make it very simple for a service provider that's operating an access network to join that federation. Make it easy for service providers to provide IDP or identity services. So we're shooting for this seamless connectivity and this ability to roam as we go about our day. We're often on Wi-Fi and LTE or 5G every day, depending on where we go and what radio is currently available to us. And as we move between these, we want to make this as seamless as possible. And it needs to be frictionless, it needs to be secure, but we also need to provide for the ability for these venues to have insights on the amount of connectivity that they're achieving. We want to make sure that we can apply policy to it. We want to make sure that we can provide privacy to it. And so these are some of the things that we're working on in doing this federation and what we're building over at the WBA. Next slide, Steve. So the way Cisco is doing this, open roaming now as a trademark is a term that represents the standard itself. And what Cisco has done is we have a solution that's called DNA Spaces. DNA Spaces is Cisco's implementation for open roaming. And again, as I was mentioning earlier, the idea here is to make it very easy for these access networks to join the federation. In fact, we want to make it to the point where these access networks can self-provision, they can self-sign on. And if we can do that, what that means is that any IDP that participates in the Open Roaming Federation will see their access footprint just growing automatically and somewhat organically. Now, to do that, you want to be able to exhibit some level of control. You want to be able to, again, apply policy to that. When do you want to roam? When do you want to hand off? When do you want to offload? And so these are some of the things that as we take open roaming as a platform, we want to build a service layer on top of. So just as an example, Cisco DNA Spaces, we have over 1.3 million access points currently live in DNA Spaces. So all those customers that have those access points, all they have to do is to go into their DNA Spaces platform, check the box that they want to join the Open Roaming Federation, and it will set the network up to join the federation. You can then configure the policy, and once you've configured the policy on which credentials you're willing to take, for example, then open roaming will start to work for you. There's over 500 million mobile devices going into our access networks today. We have over 1 trillion location updates coming in on a regular basis every year on how these devices are moving in and through these networks, over 110,000 locations that are currently live. So again, as we bootstrap Open Roaming, the power of Open Roaming is in the size of the federation. How many access networks do you have in that federation, and how many different kinds of credentials can you use? Now at Cisco, what we've done is we've built this as a platform. So you get DNA Spaces when you have your management platform. It's part of the basic license. And once you have that platform, you can layer applications so that you can add different types of services on top of that Open Roaming platform. And we've done that. We've got over 25 apps now that have been built on top of DNA Spaces. But what I'm really proud to say is that we've got some really key partners for some critical functionality, like what we're doing with Google and like what we're doing with Orion Wi-Fi. And in a minute, we're going to show you how some of those capabilities work. When I said we wanted to make it simple, as a service, you can sign an access network up to the federation using Spaces in about 30 minutes. So think about that. In 30 minutes, you can take a license you already own, a network you're already operating, and you can connect it to the Open Roaming Federation. You can set your policy, and then you can go to the next step, which would be to enable some of these services like what Orion is doing for dynamic billing and mediation. So let's go to the next slide, and I'm gonna hand off to Raj, and he's going to talk a little bit about Google's Orion.
Thank you, Matt. Hi, everybody. I don't know if you're like me. The last few days have been I've been super nervous and excited and distracted, mostly for this presentation. I assume you have been too. It's been a busy week. So what I wanted to talk about is kind of the vision around Open Roaming and share a little bit from Google's perspective and why we're so excited to participate with Matt, with the WBA, and lots of folks here in this panel. Which is that a couple years ago, we started looking at the fact that carriers need your help to cover everywhere in the world. When I'm in the basement of a convention center, when I'm at my doctor's office, I need connectivity. I rely on my carrier to provide that. But sometimes their radio towers outside don't have as good of a connection as the local network right where I am. And the folks here on this webinar and attending and in this industry have built amazing, excellent networks, increasingly better every day, that can help provide universal connectivity. And the carriers really would like to partner with you, but it's been pretty hard to do that. So at Google, working with a few carriers and working with a lot of folks in this industry, we've tried to make it much easier for you to sell capacity to carriers. A couple of years ago, we met with Matt and with folks here at the WBA at Wireless Global, at the MWC in Barcelona, back when that was the thing that happened. And we discovered that we weren't the only people thinking about this. Cisco's been thinking about it, other vendors have been thinking about it, WBA's been thinking about it. And a lot of those conversations have coalesced into Open Roaming. Open Roaming is essentially, how do I make it a lot easier for other people to join my network? One of the ways in which you want other people to join your network is on a paid basis. I may want to share my capacity with carriers, and Orion Wi-Fi is our attempt to make that super easy. So there's a few different things happening in Orion Wi-Fi. One is that we've changed the model from being a permanent long-term relationship to kind of an at-will session-by-session relationship. That makes it a little bit easier. You can turn on carrier offload and see how it goes. For the carrier, similarly, they can turn it on and see how it goes. The second thing is standards. If any of you have tried to engage in a Wi-Fi offload or Wi-Fi roaming relationship in the past, you'll know that every single one of those relationships is manual and custom, and they don't have to be. With a little bit of effort in making things standardized and simple, you can use the same template over and over, which is why working with the WBA on the standards themselves is pretty important. Orion Wi-Fi can be thought of as sort of a pre-standards implementation of Open Roaming Settled. So the Open Roaming standards are being developed to handle payment use cases, and Orion Wi-Fi is part of that. We're helping build those standards. And finally, automation. It shouldn't be this hard. It shouldn't be super manual. You know, there's an axiom in computer science that you shouldn't ask the user to do anything the computer can figure out. And so what we've tried to do is to say you should turn on carrier offload for your network, and then the computers will figure out a lot of the details for you. You don't need to do that yourself. Next slide, Steve. So with that said, what's the reason to use carrier offload? Well, by reducing the cost side, by using open roaming standards, the ROI shoots way up. The value of doing a carrier offload agreement can be, a moderate amount of money, but the cost and the effort can go way, way down, which makes this a much more profitable proposition for the venue, for the managed service provider, for those who are building and deploying high quality networks. We've made this easy and secure by default, and we've tried to create a lot of value for all parts of the ecosystem. I'm proud to say that we're working with leading roaming hubs, we're working with leading managed service providers, we're working with leading vendors, and honestly, we think that we're just trying to reduce friction and help everybody do their business a lot easier. Next slide, Steve. So in terms of making things a lot easier, I'm pretty excited that Cisco, in their DNA Spaces product, has created a store of sorts, and this open roaming Orion Wi-Fi capability is now in their store. So in DNA Spaces, it's a pretty straightforward proposition to sign up for and turn on Orion Wi-Fi in your network. You can activate the app in the DNA Spaces store. Next slide, Steve. You'll see that you've started it, and then you come to our system on the back end to finish the configuration. I'm sorry, Steve, next slide. So finishing the configuration, then you can come to our website, orion.area120.com, to see the deployment guides and the details of how to turn it on and how to work with it. And then next slide, Steve. You can come through to a self-service portal to establish your own account, to create the terms on which you'd like to sell Wi-Fi, and to finish the setup and configuration. The NetNet is that what used to take 12 to 18 months, I had one woman tell me that she did this once and it was the worst professional experience of her career. What used to take 12 to 18 months and a lot of pain can now take an hour or two or less. And it can be pretty straightforward and simple to list your Wi-Fi network and say, I'm available for carriers to use it. So we're excited about the partnership with Cisco to embed this capability as part of their open roaming suite in DNA Spaces. And we're particularly excited to work with the whole industry to make these very valuable relationships a heck of a lot easier and more standardized. So that's the Orion Wi-Fi story. Matt, thank you. I'd be happy to turn it back to you. And Steve, I think we can go to the next slide where Matt was going to talk a little bit about architecture.
So you saw how simple this was, and what we really want to do as we implement these things is to make sure that the complexity that sometimes is behind these systems is really hidden from both that end user and from the IT department or the IDP that's implementing it. And what you can see here is that from the user equipment to the access point to our DNA Spaces connector, and every open roaming implementation needs a connector that establishes that secure tunnel through, not actually through the Federation, but facilitated by the Federation directly into its IDP for authentication, and then connecting into Orion, where we can apply new capabilities. And when I say new capabilities, things like what is the current SLA of the network that you're going into? If you hand off, are you going to get a good experience when you go into that network? What's it going to cost to go into the network? And so now you can start to take these types of things into consideration and apply that for more sophisticated path selection, what we call intelligent path selection. When do you go to Wi-Fi? When do you stay on LTE? Where are you going to get the best experience? How do we best go indoors in a building? Which network that might be available in the building should you connect to? And so all of those things come into play as we simplify this ability to join those networks and to manage those networks. So with that, we can go to the next slide. So we have a little call to action here. If you're interested in applying open roaming, say you got a network deployed or you want to install a new network, we've got someone over at Cisco that runs the whole program. His name is Lucas Hansen. You can contact him at luhansen@cisco.com, and we'll get you set up. You probably, if you have a Cisco deployment, you probably already have the license. So we'd be very happy to help you join into the Federation and answer any questions that you might have. Raj, I know Google has some good contacts too.
Yeah, absolutely. So you can visit orion.area120.com. Orion Wi-Fi comes out of the Area 120 R&D lab at Google. For more information about the product on the web, and feel free to email us. We're at ask.orion@google.com, and we're happy to answer questions, jump on the phone, and share more information.
So with that, we'll wrap up. Steve, any
Okay.
questions?
Thank you. Yeah, no, thank you, gentlemen. Very interesting as well. So in the audience, if there are any questions that you'd like to submit to Matthew or to Raj, please use the questions tabs and we'll take those and start to pass those through. Yeah, I believe we already had one, so good. We have an active audience today. First question here. So for 4G, 5G in-building systems, it looks like building owners will be paying neutral hosts and carriers will onboard usually for free. How will Orion compete against that for offload to Wi-Fi instead?
So
maybe.
Yeah, happy to answer that question. A 4G, 5G neutral host distributed antenna system is better than Wi-Fi from a carrier's perspective. And so that has its own relationships, its own terms, its own mechanisms. This is an extra. So if you have a high quality Wi-Fi network, there are some carriers, particularly MVNOs, who would like to tap into that Wi-Fi network as an alternative when there isn't a neutral host or a DAS in place. So I don't view these as competitive. Honestly, I think the future of networking, the future of telecom is really kind of a mesh of different kinds of networks and different kinds of capabilities. And so by using Orion Wi-Fi, you offer up your Wi-Fi to be part of that mesh. And there'll be some carriers who take advantage of that, some who use their own RAN, others who prefer a neutral host. There's going to be lots of options out there.
Yeah, I agree with what Raj is saying, and I would consider this an extension of what you're currently doing with DAS. There's very specific business models where DAS makes a lot of sense. DAS usually has a pretty good cost associated with it. Again, it makes a lot of sense, especially in dense type venues. But we also typically see Wi-Fi in these venues, and we see Wi-Fi in venues that even go down market where it may not make as much sense to put in a DAS. And so what this allows you to do here is to apply your DAS model more broadly. Remember, both DAS and Wi-Fi are a neutral access network. And if we can apply an SLA against the Wi-Fi access network so the operator knows what they're going to get, then they can leverage DAS systems, they can leverage Wi-Fi offload in a way that makes most business sense on a venue by venue basis.
Okay. Thank you. Yeah, we have lots of questions coming through, so we're going to have to be selective, but we will basically collect up the questions as well for the end and then try to get answers back to everybody. But maybe if we can just take one more, and it's around the QoS. So I think, Matt, you talked about this at the start, but how does Cisco DNA Spaces or Orion determine the quality of the Wi-Fi connection?
And this is a little bit vendor dependent. Right now, we're working on the standard over at the WGA so that we can have certain tiers that are well defined and well understood. But what it does is it basically looks at the current capacity of the network. And so we have sensors that are placed on the network that are measuring what the capacity of that particular access direction is. Those sensors then feed into the device actually, so that they know, and then from the device it feeds into the IDP, so that they know if they're going to get a good service when they offload or not. There's a couple of places, key points, where you can collect this information. For example, you can collect it right at the connector itself, because all the traffic is going through the connector. And what we do at Cisco is we take it a little bit further. Cisco, in its assurance platform, it actually gathers data from every point in the network, So you want to know more than, hey, is the Wi-Fi radio completely occupied? Sometimes the Wi-Fi radio has all sorts of capacity, and the problem is actually in the backhaul connection. You may not have sufficient backhaul. So what we do is we aggregate that information together so that we know that the full path all the way out to that service in the cloud, whether or not that is a good service and it meets an SLA. And then you can drive those decisions on when to hand off and when not, or when to offload, I should say.
Okay, well, thank you, Matt, and Raj again. So just in the interest of time, we are running a little bit over. I think we should move on to our next speaker. So pleased to introduce you to Chris Bruce. He's Managing Director for Global Reach Technologies, and he's going to be talking about how to make the promise of a world-class public Wi-Fi experience a reality. So Chris, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Steve. And hopefully you can see my screen.
Yes, we can.
Yep. Okay. Thank you very much. And great start from Matt and Raj there. Teed things up very nicely and explained how open roaming and Orion fit. So I wanted to talk about how to make the promise of a world-class public Wi-Fi experience a reality, and federated roaming, open roaming will be a key part of that. So let me just, oops, let me go straight ahead. So to me, it's all about the user experience. So what does a Wi-Fi utopia look like? It's the user experience that is seamless, ubiquitous, and I think matches the speeds for the application you want to use. So I think of that quite carefully, that not all applications require high speed. It's a variation of different use cases. And then I think the next thing is, from the venue side, how can you still, despite this seamless connection, this frictionless access, can you still engage, identify and engage with customers whilst at the same time respecting their privacy? And this is one of the big tensions, I think, facing us during the last year or so, particularly this year with MAC randomization coming in and the pressures around, and rightly so, the concerns around privacy. But at the same time, it challenges the business models that have made Wi-Fi available from a number of venues. And then finally, is the Wi-Fi experience secure? And can you get a kind of predictable quality of service? So to me, these are some of the things that are really important. But we've done a poll here today, but not knowing that Steve was going to ask that question, I asked a similar question when I was moderating earlier this week at the session on Monday. And I asked the audience then, what are the biggest challenges facing Wi-Fi innovation? And I found it very interesting that speed was not number one, nowhere near number one. And in fact, despite the fact that we had presentations on Wi-Fi 7, we know that move from Wi-Fi 6 to Wi-Fi, from Wi-Fi 5 to Wi-Fi 6 is already a huge step. Then we heard about, again, what a huge step it would be to Wi-Fi 7. Actually, it wasn't data speed that most people are concerned about. On Monday, the audience there came back and said, well, it's about data security, privacy, identity management, and about how to monetize the Wi-Fi, pay for it, the commercial considerations, and the costs. And then today, when Steve ran the poll earlier, you said number one, by a long way, was onboarding users. Then came monetization. So quite an interesting combination of things. How do you manage the privacy, the identity management at the same time? How do you allow users to connect seamlessly and onboard the identity profile that allows them to connect seamlessly? So that's where we're all coming from, and these are some of the challenges we're facing. So I've got 5 dependencies that I see to making this vision, this utopia, a reality. And I've bucketized them around here. How do we get to Passpoint? How do we use this technology that's been around for many years? Certainly at Global Reach, we've deployed it since 2014 with customers, but it's not quite taken up until recently. So how do we accelerate the pathway to Passpoint? How do we help Wi-Fi operators, venues, enterprises to make that step, and then take the drive the mass adoption of a federation. It's by its nature, it only works if there is a federation, if there's a mass adoption, and take advantage of new bandwidth or radio spectrum that's becoming available, drive that convergence and coexistence, as Raj was saying, about cellular and Wi-Fi, particularly indoors, and take advantage of the Wi-Fi 6 capabilities, let alone Wi-Fi 7 that I've mentioned already. So we start with Passpoint, previously known as Hotspot 2, for that seamless connection and one-time profile onboarding. And I think the challenge for us all is how to get the profile to the device. We have lots and lots of experience of working with SIM authentication, where the profile is downloaded by the operator to the SIM, but how do you get it there for venues and for other parties that want to provide you with a profile if it's not downloaded over the air? And as I mentioned before, the increased focus on MAC randomization, which nearly happened but didn't quite happen quite as extensively as we thought might. I think that's not gone away. That will, I'm sure, come back, and all Wi-Fi operators, all venues should be thinking about how to respond to that, whether to go to a point where you can embrace it and work with Passpoint, or alternatively think of a different model, because you will not be able to recognize that user coming back, and it may just have to be a click and connect, and all your ability to communicate with that user will be much more challenging. And then, addressing, I think Matt put it quite nicely, how to make it simple for the user, simple for the IT department in the enterprise, and simple for operators and IDPs. So how to overcome those issues around engagement and user experience. And Passpoint is not new. We're combining technologies that have been around a while, Passpoint, the online sign up, and an innovation around creating a standalone service that enables operators to deliver these Passpoint profiles in an effective and elegant way, whether it's through an OSU or through an app, to improve that onboarding experience. So we're looking for something that's easy, an end-to-end solution for every service provider, and this is why we're focusing on this, and we've launched this service as global reach, in fact, yesterday. We think Passpoint adoption makes high volume attachment a reality. It's easy, it's seamless, to get that better experience. Now the challenge is how to, from a venue point of view, how to still recognize and engage with your user, your customer, your passenger, your guest, however you think of the user. And venue URL and cat port from Google and Android, Google and Apple will help enable that. At Global Reach, we have some technology that will allow other devices to use a similar message, so that you can direct the user in session to a web page if you wish, if they wish to accept that. Now, what you lose in terms of creating that barrier to get on with the portal, the previous captive portal, I think you actually gain, because a far higher, significantly far higher number of devices will attach, and a proportion of them will accept the invitation to look at your web portal. So you're trading people who've had to get past the landing page as an encumbrance, as a barrier. You're now trading it for a much larger number of people, some of whom will accept the invitation to look at your portal. They'll actually be looking at it. So I think net, you may actually find that venues might be ahead. So we want to accelerate that through easy profile creation. So yes, SIM authentications is a very simple way of providing access, but not everybody wants to deliver that through their cellular service. They might want to download the profile themselves, or a venue might want to control that themselves. So hence, we've launched Passpoint Profile Service, PPS. It's a managed service that we're offering to the industry to enable Wi-Fi operators to deliver such a service, accelerating seamless and secure onboarding, taking advantage of federated Wi-Fi, including, and most importantly on this webinar, WBA's Open Roaming, and it's built for high volumes with an API to handle that really high volume, high density situation. Also, understanding the correct device format. They're not all the same between different operating systems and possibly even different variants of devices within that system. Integrated with a web portal to give your message, and also potentially integrated with a loyalty app or some other means of delivering the profile. We live and breathe Passpoint. Something like 80% of the authentications that we enable as a software provider and services provider to the industry, about 80% of the connections we enable are Passpoint. And we're very proud that last week in the WBA Awards, we were successful in winning the award for the best Wi-Fi operator, working with our partner Intersection and their technology partner Google to enable AT&T to offload a huge amount of traffic from the cellular network to these kiosks that you can see here called Link NYC. They've got 1 gig backhaul to the curbside kiosk there with an access point hidden in the roof, and users automatically connect if they have a Passpoint profile, either provided by AT&T for SIM authentication, or they may have registered themselves and downloaded it onto their phone. And as they go in and out of coverage from the Wi-Fi, from LTE to Wi-Fi and back, they just seamlessly connect. And by the end of September, we had offloaded some 2 petabytes, of data over some nearly over half a billion sessions. So we're very proud to be part of that, to have enabled the authentication, provide the captive portal, and the Passpoint online service, sign-up service for use. So, enabling the mass take-up of federated roaming. Well, you know, we've heard about the importance of standardizing it. You've heard what Raj says about how easy it can be to participate, about the lady who'd found that previous ways of doing it have been so painful. And whilst traditionally negotiating between a very large carrier and a very large footprint, which may take some weeks, months, testing and so forth, is all understandable, that's not a way to scale. And for me, federated roaming is a game changer, and it's the only thing that's really held Wi-Fi roaming back compared to cellular, is that you know, this now provides the methods, the tools, the discipline, and the incentives for everybody to participate. And we really have to answer the what's in it for me, the WIFM, for all parts of the ecosystem. And I think you know, we really have to reach out to enterprise to make sure that they want to participate, whether it's settled or free, and there could be cases why they would want to do either or both. You know, Matt's approach through DNA Open Spaces clearly reaches a large part of the market. HP Aruba, we know, has got something, an alternative approach for their customer base, and they're integrating connection with other roaming federations. Orion, we've heard about, but EduRoam, GovRoam, all of this, I think, allows us to scale, and more gets more. So we just need everybody on this call, everybody who's represented, to really pitch in, and more will get more, and the benefits will just multiply. So 60 gigahertz, well, what can I say? You know, a huge increase in radio spectrum will make the more exciting, the more imaginative applications real, whether it's virtual reality, augmented reality. And it's great to see that following the announcements and the moves by the FCC in the US, that the UK has followed with Ofcom's moves, and now we're starting to see countries in South America, South Korea, following suit, and I suspect that will snowball. And in the US in particular, this is something like a 4 times increase in radio spectrum, so it really is a game changer. I'm coming back to the cellular and Wi-Fi convergence. You know, I don't see it as a either or. I see this as a complementary technology. You know, every example of providing coverage and capacity has been met with users using it It's like what we call in the UK the M25 syndrome. M25 being a motorway that goes around London. Every time they add another lane, it gets filled right up. And that's because there's a pent-up demand to communicate, to travel. Currently in the UK, we've suppressed that a little bit thanks to COVID, but in normal times, that's the case. And I think there's a finite amount of spectrum, there's a finite amount of capex, but there is an insatiable desire and demand to be online, and richer applications consuming that bandwidth and that radio spectrum. So in my mind, using all the tools in the toolbox is the smartest way to go forward for operators, and the best way to manage your financial capex allocation and your OPEX capex mix by roaming. Again, very proud that we were able to work with our partners Ontix in London to enable a pilot network around Trafalgar Square, enabling an international roaming operator this time, which was AT&T, to roam onto that network with some 4,000 connections a day in possibly the least attractive time to be wandering around Trafalgar Square, which was January this year, pre-COVID. 4,000 connections, I think, is pretty impressive for an international operator, for which at a time when US visitors are unlikely to be choosing to travel to London. So really quite impressive. And I think that just shows that they deploy both cellular and Wi-Fi on these lampposts, showing how it coexists. So I think I've already mentioned Wi-Fi 6. I'm not going to say too much more about it, but the extension into Wi-Fi 6 and 6E to me is a complementary technology to 5G. If you look at the famous spider diagram between the design specifications of the IEEE for Wi-Fi, Wi-Fi 6 versus LTE and 5G new radio, you see that in many aspects the Wi-Fi 6 outperforms or at least matches a 5G new radio, with the definite exception of mobility, but then that's not surprising. But in most other areas, in terms of throughput, in terms of latency, it gives 5G a pretty good run for its money, but at a much lower cost. So I think now's the time to look at how to use this mix of technologies in the optimal way to manage the budgets in a time when I think our COVID hit economies are going to need us to be careful with how we deploy our funds. So I think Utopia is within reach, and I call out Passpoint, that seamless onboarding, federated roaming, and the opportunity to converge cellular and Wi-Fi as being the three key areas that we as an industry and as the WBA need to focus on. So with that, I'm going to hand over to you, Steve.
Thanks, Chris. Yeah, congratulations on the product launch yesterday.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, and actually a question we had come in on that one here, so I'll share it now. So you mentioned the new Global Reach Passpoint profile service. Do Wi-Fi operators need to actually take the full radio service, or can they take the profile generation capability?
Well, we'd be happy to offer the full service with the radius and the roaming and so forth, but we also recognize that some folks may not have the ability to create their own Passpoint profiles, and we think we can help there. So we stripped that out as a separate service. And I think quite apart from our own business, I think the more we can enable the industry to create profiles and be Passpoint ready, the sooner we'll get the federation really motoring. So if anybody wishes to talk to us about that, we'd be obviously very happy.
Okay, thank you. And I'm just seeing another question come through here, actually on the monetization side of this thing. So it's saying here, should venues actually still be talking about monetization? Isn't Wi-Fi an immediacy service now?
Well, I think that's a very fair point. Monetization, inverted commas, you could go to a venue and you get complimentary water. Is that being monetized, or is it an amenity? Is it kind of implicit within the price you pay for using that venue, whether it's a hotel or a conference room or something? It's a good point. But I think I'm sort of talking about monetization in its broader sense. It can still be a way for a venue, a brand to put forward its offers or its messaging or accept T's and C's to a user using the venue URL service. But you're right, we are morphing into a different world. But you know, to provide high quality Wi-Fi, like any high quality or acceptable network service, does cost money in terms of the equipment, the backhaul, the maintenance and support. So for some venues, for some businesses, that may need to be covered somehow, or a contribution to it. But I do accept the point that it's increasingly an amenity that one way or another is going to be part of the business model.
Okay. Yeah, thanks again, Chris. I certainly haven't seen Trafalgar Square look that busy for a while either, so you must have got that pre-COVID. Okay, yeah, that's for sure. So in the interest of time, we do need to move on to our next speaker as well. So we have Kishore Raja, who's VP of Engineering and Strategy from Boingo Wireless, and he's going to be talking about the road ahead, airports navigating COVID-19. So Kishore, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Steve. Greetings and salutations. So as Steve mentioned, the topic is really near and dear to me. It's basically navigating through airports and venues during the COVID-19 era. So one thing I want to talk specifically is that, you know, we all know the challenges going on with the COVID-19 situation. And I want to focus specifically on airports and not other venues. And I'm going to talk through the differences and the challenges we have. And interestingly enough, some of these challenges are actually creating enormous amount of opportunities. So let me try to jump right in. So hopefully you can see my screen.
Yep.
All right. So for those of you who don't know, Boingo Wireless is a neutral host service provider. We service close to 1 billion consumers annually. So we have all kinds of deployments starting from DAS. So we have about 40,000 DAS nodes deployed as of Q3 2020, and we have at least like 11 to 12,000 nodes in the backlog. We have more than 100,000 Wi-Fi access points deployed with services from Passpoint, including Wi-Fi 6 quality of service. Of course, you know, we're working with all the vendors and the operators on Wi-Fi 6E trials, and hopefully plan to deploy them soon when 6E becomes mainstream. Then we also have small cells. We have deployments in more than 3,000 buildings in military bases, universities, university campuses, single family and multifamily MDU style of deployment, as well as in you know, other types of venues like transportation hubs and stadiums, so on and so forth. So given the deployments we have, not just on the Wi-Fi perspective, but any type of wireless connectivity solutions. That could be, besides Wi-Fi, as I mentioned before, licensed technologies using DAS and small cells. Then we also have CBRS. Most of you must know that CBRS has not only gained a lot of traction here in US, but we just had a CBRS PAL auctions of 70 megahertz. Roughly about $4.5 billion was spent, where the spectrum was auctioned, and then we have another spectrum auction coming up here in US, at least what we call the C-band auction. So there's a lot of new, think of these spectrum auctions as new highways being open. You know, Chris was talking about lanes being, you know, opening up in 25. These are basically new ways and new highways, and these highways will be full soon. Even though it's COVID-19 situation, there's not many people are traveling as much as they used to, and I'm going to show some foot traffic stats, or at least I'm going to talk about it. There's still opportunity, and as these highway lanes open up, there's this tremendous amount of deployments that's happening. And for us at Boingo, we're actually right in the middle of those, experiencing those, deploying those, going through the challenges, and understanding the opportunities and capitalizing on them, and specifically monetizing, right? That's really why most of us are here for. Okay, with that, let's jump into this one. So I want to talk about a couple of quotes here. The first one is from ACI-NA, which is Airports Council International in North America. So the journey through airports around the world will be forever changed by COVID-19. We all know this, right? It's been close to what, 8 months now, at least since the lockdown here in States have been begun, and there's a new normal. It's I don't think in the short to midterm we'll get back to the normal that was before the COVID-19 era. We're right now in the normal scenario, which is a new normal, right? So to rebuild customers' consumer confidence and foster a steady increase in passenger traffic, airports are using technology to reimagine a new travel experience. So we, especially in airports, we already had all kinds of new and innovative technologies, including facial recognition with biometrics and monitoring solutions, solutions to understand people movement within security checkpoints, a solution for wireless utility monitoring, indoor navigation, so on and so forth. Now we have new things being added. Now, obviously, what are those new things? How do we keep track of social distancing? I mean, we can do this manually, or we can automate these things. So one of the things that we're working with most of the airports is how do we automate these solutions so the airport staff has better tools and technologies using which they can monitor these norms, the new norms in the COVID-19 effectively. So I'm going to talk through what are these challenges and what are these norms. So I'm going to classify them into three main categories. The first one is implementing new health and wellness measures, right? So airports taking a whole bunch of measures. So one of the key topic in large airports is security. Security is always the key topic, be it pre-COVID or the current COVID-19 situation. But with COVID-19, it's even more prominent because the airport has to add more tools and measures to do the monitoring, be it social distancing or monitoring utilities, baggage tracking, even though we don't see so much foot traffic. So there's more stress on the airports to make sure that these services are delivered. So to manage the health of all of these services is completely another task that the airports are focusing so far. The second type of category is communicating. So different types of communications happen within the airport venues, communicating flight information to the passengers, communication between the airline staff members, communication between the concessions for deployment and foot traffic and so on and so forth. And then last but not the least is during the COVID-19 era, monitoring is even more key compared to what we had before, because obviously at any given point of time, we don't want to be flying blind. So we want to understand how many people are there in the airport, how many people are there in the restrooms, what kind of foot traffic we have in concessions, what kind of foot traffic we have in security checkpoints and pre-check areas, how many people are waiting at the gate, how many people are at the restaurants. So now add on to this one with the social distancing and all the health checks and the temperature scanning, the cameras, the sensors, biometrics. Monitoring is even more key, and so that's one of the key things that we're focusing with airports. Now, what we're doing is, with the combination of neutral host technologies. Chris was talking about convergence. So we strongly believe at Boingo Wireless, we really strongly believe in convergence. Using any of these technologies, we build a monitoring solution. It could be through the DAS nodes. It could be through Wi-Fi access points. We also have tiny Raspberry Pi devices that we install in different locations within the airport. We have other types of NFV-based solutions that we have that continuously monitor bandwidth, latency, packet loss, and now foot traffic, the social distancing, the health of the passengers as they walk by in a specific area, biometrics, facial recognition. So these are actually, as you can see, are creating opportunities for us. There are a lot of challenges to be addressed, and but we are taking these one by one and embracing on the opportunities. So I want to walk through close to about 7 to 8 different scenarios that we are focusing in airports. obviously what we call as touchless passenger experience. These are all the broad use cases which we have already implemented in the airports or we're in the process of implementing. The first one, which is an obvious one, is a social distancing, right? So what do we use for this? We use cameras and sensors, all types of sensors, existing installed node-based sensors, as well as the new cameras that we are installing in some of the airports, allow us to seamlessly and securely, using automated mechanism, monitor the social distancing. And then a couple of things I want to talk about in this slide is, you see towards the right-hand side, it talks about the connectivity solution. There's like 3 or 4 different types you see. We have a Wi-Fi, a wireless connectivity solution. Believe it or not, we still have a wired internet that we deploy in many of our venues. We also have this concept of private LTE, where we provide a private network services. This can be on LTE, it can be on Wi-Fi. I'm going to give you a couple of examples. So for instance, in some of the lounges, for the airline lounges, we have a specific dedicated wireless network with its own backhaul, with its own SSID, with its own SLA and bandwidth. So that's a private network for those lounge venues. We also have a very similar network on the LTE side. It's a private dedicated network. Think of this as a network slicing in the 5G era, where you get your own slice, everything from bandwidth and the quality of service to your own radio access network and connectivity mechanism, right? So, so just keep that in mind when you look at the connectivity solution on the right-hand side. The second use case is security measurement and monitoring. I talked about securities is always key in airports. Whether you have foot traffic at 100%, or if you have foot traffic roughly about 30 to 50% now. I was just looking at the TSA security website to look at the foot traffic on a daily basis. We are still somewhere between 30 to 50%. That doesn't mean that we have to take security lightly. That's when security is very crucial, and we want to make sure that we completely embrace that even in this situation. So cameras and sensors are used for that. The next one, which is a key one, the earlier presenters talked about MAC randomization, randomizing the way to identify a unique hardware ID from any of the device connecting in the venues. So personal identification checkpoints at different areas like ticketing and Customs and Border Patrol, TSA security gates. So right now, as perhaps Chris mentioned, we do have randomization of MAC addresses, but it's not fully randomized. So we have enough time to prepare to understand how do we make sure that we provide a personalization service. So when we have a customer visit and connect to an airport, if the same customer comes back and visits the venue, we actually know that this person has visited before, and then we can actually push personalized services. That can be a personalized web page, or it can be showing where the concession is, showing where the closest taxi and the Uber services for business passengers, for instance. So this is something that our customers see a lot of value in these services, and will continue to do this. Now, obviously, for this, if you look at the components, there's a whole bunch of components that go in making this happen. Self-service facial biometrics, recognition services, all kinds of touchless services to provide a personalized experience, not just for check-in and boarding, even past boarding, even when users actually come and land in an airport. The best way and the simplified way to find their appropriate personalized service is what we focus on. The next use case is concessions and point of sale. So obviously concessions is, the number of concessions are not close to 100%. In fact, I just traveled about a month back. I traveled 10,000 miles, flew different types of airports from Los Angeles to Dallas to London Heathrow to India. And even though the measures in each of these airports are different, the end goal is exactly the same. Make sure the safety of the passengers, make sure the airport has close to the services that used to be the pre-COVID-19 era. I did observe that, in some of the airports, the concessions were like close to 25% or, less than a quarter of the concessions were open. But we still need to make sure that they have the best connectivity experience, be it on the Wi-Fi side, or be it on a private network side, or be it on the public network side, right? So this, again, in the component side, we have self-service payment, point of sale. especially for somebody who's shopping at one of the concession. They want to make sure that their point of sale device works as quickly and seamlessly as possible, so the customers can do the transaction without experiencing any delays or any other types of issues. The next use case is really a key use case. It's staff and first responder communication. We have all kinds of first responder communication, private networks, public networks, and other types of networks that's going on in these airports. These are very, very crucial, especially during the COVID-19 era, from a safety perspective, right? So if the airport staff or if the first responders need to attend to something, we need to make sure that their services get prioritized. So the push-to-talk devices are still prominent, and they get a dedicated access to the network, either using private LTE or using the Wi-Fi network. The next use case, I talked about monitoring, but cleaning and maintenance tracking. I mean, most of us take this for granted, but really, making sure to have a healthy and clean airports, as well as the bathrooms and the restrooms, no matter what the foot traffic is really, really key, and we continue to do this. We provide all kinds of connectivity and technologies to make sure that the crew has the appropriate connectivity solution to continue their tasks. One thing I want to highlight here is airports are increasingly using robotics for some of these solutions. And as one of the presenters earlier identified, that the upcoming networks, be it 5G or be it CBRS private LTE, or be it Wi-Fi 6 and 6E, it's not just about higher bandwidth always. It's also about low latency, especially for robotics type of applications. You want to make sure that the latency is as low as possible, low packet loss, low jitter, low end-to-end latency communication. So these are some of the things that we see increasingly that the venues demand, specifically the airports, but we see that being demanded in the other types of venues as well, like sports arenas and transportation hubs, and so on and so forth. Then the last two is health check screening. I already talked about it. This is obviously part of the social distancing and the same COVID-19 measures, all types of infrared sensors, cameras, and autonomous automated thermometers. The last but not the least is passenger communication. This is really, really key. Now, one of the key things that I want to identify here is, in the new norm, even though we are still trying to stay vigilant and not travel as much as possible, the services are coming back to normal. Sports, all the sports games are happening, MLB, basketball, tennis, and all of these are happening. The key difference over these areas where the activities are happening versus airports is, in these sports stadiums, you have the games going on, but you don't really have audience. If you do have audience, it's going to be maybe a couple of hundred. I mean, I saw that in French Open tennis, they had probably close to 1,000 people for the finals. But for all the previous games, they literally just had the coach and the family members and the people who are taking care of the tournament. On the flip side, if you move to airports, you can say that, hey, we can continue running the airports, but we can't have passengers, right? That's not going to work. So there will be passengers, foot traffic happening in the airports. So the communication for the passengers, be it flight delays or be it flight changes or whatever is the public communication, they still have to continue, not just through the regular devices, but even devices like digital signage, where connectivity is going to be key over there. Wi-Fi connections and portal communications, push notifications, SMS notifications, and all kinds of other types of messaging. So as you can see, overall, there's a whole bunch of use cases. These are creating us opportunities. Now, these are just in the airport venues. You flip that to other types of venues, like for instance, in universities and students, we have distance learning, which is increasingly getting popular because of the COVID-19, and we are seeing a whole bunch of opportunities over there. All right. So to summarize, especially for the airport, all of these different technologies are going to be key. Everything from Wi-Fi 6, 6E, Passpoint, CBRS, including millimeter wave, which we have deployed in some of the venues, LoRa on the IoT side, obviously the upcoming 5G deployments in the standalone as well as in the non-standalone. And Raj and Matt talked about open roaming and some of the open federation, so that's going to be key for us as well. because for us, any connectivity technology that allows passengers and users and devices and things to be connected, it's going to be a win-win situation for us. Of course, LTE will continue to stay that on the DAS and the small cells network. And then last but not the least is we are experimenting with the very early versions of the NRU solutions. These are pre-alpha solutions in some of our venues, along with the millimeter wave. So it's a combination of really all of these converging together provides a seamless connectivity experience. Because for an average user, they don't care what technology they connect to, as long as they're connected and they can attend to their service. So the last thing I want to talk about neutral host is there's a whole bunch of advantages, right? So the first one is we can prioritize the venue needs. If the venue says, hey, I want to have a private network for the lounges, we can say we can provide that using Wi-Fi or LTE. If a particular airline comes and says, I want to make sure that my airline, when we land at the venue, we want to offload all the telemetry and the airline, the flight data seamlessly, we can say, hey, we can lease about 10 megahertz of spectrum, or we can give you a dedicated 160 megahertz of Wi-Fi channel for instant fast download of all the flight data, so they can start onboarding and taking on their next flight again, right? So we can prioritize those venue needs with the combination of those technologies. Obviously, drives revenue opportunities. I just talked about the challenges creating opportunities, and we are seeing lots of those happening in different segments of the airports, which means a monetization opportunity for us. Efficiently manage carriers densification, right? So this is a key thing. Chris was talking about Passpoint offload. We have literally more than 80 million users offloading using Passpoint technology for the carriers, and carriers love this because it's a high capacity offload, secure and seamless offload, very similar experience, just like connecting to a macro tower. Solves demand of today and plans for the future, which is pretty obvious with the upcoming spectrum and technologies. And then the last one I really want to focus is on convergence. For flexible deployment, be it licensed, unlicensed, or shared licensed, it can literally cover all the use cases in any venue, and especially in airports. So we are all in this together. This is really, really key, especially in the tough times that we're going through. We will get through this one, and connectivity is going to be key during this era. And I'm personally really very happy, excited to go through this era and see some of the opportunities being created. With that, thank you very much. Back to you, Steve, if there's any questions.
Yeah, no, thank you, Kishore. I think the WBA, certainly we have a lot of friends in the airline space, and yeah, we're trying to help where we can, and we sympathize with the issues, and we hope they have a good recovery as well. Yeah, so more questions coming through. On that note, actually, on that topic of the challenging times in the airline industry, how challenging is it dealing specifically with airports compared to other venues? That's one of the questions that we have coming through.
Yeah, I think, Steve, I kind of partially answered that question as I was going through my presentation. As I mentioned, right, so every industry is trying to come back to, not to normal, but come back to opening services as much as possible. Be it a retail store like a mall, or be it a sports I talked about, right? We have most of the sports that are coming back to at least playing the games. I mean, I'm personally excited to see, especially on the baseball side, Dodgers just won the championship. At the same side, on the basketball side, Lakers won the championship. Unfortunately, I couldn't be there personally to celebrate, even though it's like literally just 10 miles away from my house. So we see these services coming back to close to normal, but you don't have audience over there. Now flip that to the airport side. As I mentioned, you still have to deal with passengers. You have to go through the measures of social distancing, temperature checks, and any other security issues that you would go through, which otherwise you would not really have to go through at scale, at least in these venues. And as I mentioned before, the foot traffic is still between 30 to 50%. It's not really low. It's coming back up, and it's going to be seasonal. There will be people traveling now that Thanksgiving is coming. There's going to be some traveling happening. So that is where we see the challenge, and we have to continuously maintain and monitor the services, and we can't take the rest over there.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, still more questions coming through. Maybe we'll take one more and then we can move on. So question here, is anyone looking at deploying Wi-Fi type technology in CBRS spectrum or other local license bands like 3.7 to 3.8 gigahertz, say in Germany, or 3.8 to 4.2 gigahertz in the UK?
Interesting question. I'm not sure if I'll be able to comment specifically in the UK, but this is actually a good question. So deploying Wi-Fi in a CBRS band or perhaps in the 3.7 band. I can't comment what's going on in US and perhaps what the path is given that the CBRS spectrum auction is completed, at least in the US. So as I mentioned before, we have 150 megahertz of spectrum space in the CBRS, out of which 70 megahertz is licensed PAL. The remaining 80 megahertz is what's called as a GAA, a generic authorized access, and anybody can go and deploy over there. Right now, it's only for the CBRS LTE standards that can deploy in that spectrum. But going forward, we all know how LTE technology is getting deployed in Wi-Fi, right? So obviously, it started with LTE-U, and then you have LTE now and unlicensed technologies, not just in the Wi-Fi, but there's a pretty good chance that it would get into CBRS because that 80 megahertz of spectrum is pretty much for anyone to grab. There are already standards being discussed for a spectrum sharing in those in that particular spectrum area. Now flipping on to 3.7 to 4.2, the spectrum auction has not even happened yet. My belief, at least in the US, is that most of the spectrum would be licensed. I don't think there'll be any unlicensed or shared licensed happening in that area. Who knows? That could change. But you do see on the 6 gigahertz spectrum, right? So you have about 1.2 gigahertz of spectrum. Chris was talking about Wi-Fi 6E, so that's a large chunk of spectrum over there. We would see a similar type of database sharing that happened on CBRS, which is already happening on Wi-Fi 6E, and we would also start to see spectrum sharing happening over there.
Okay. Okay, well, thank you, Kishore. Great presentation. We need to move on now to our next speaker. So I'd like to introduce the audience to Blaise Vazpedic. He's the CTO from Single Digits. And Blaise is going to be talking about creating value for network owners. So Blaise, in your own time.
Fantastic. Can you guys see the screen okay?
We can, but you're not in full screen or full presentation format just yet.
Better?
Yeah, that worked. That's it. Great.
Okay, fantastic. All right, excellent. Well, thanks, Steve, for having me, and thanks to the presenters thus far for really kind of tackling the topics, the technology, and some of the important factors as we look to as the theme of the presentation, transform public and guest Wi-Fi, right? A lot of technology options, a lot of use cases, and I'm going to dig into a few of them here. And I think that the most important thing initially here is to really understand what we have in terms of the experience that the venue owners are trying to deliver, right? The public networks, whether it's parks, libraries, community Wi-Fi, internet access, as might have been mentioned previous, largely delivered as a convenience or an amenity for the property, trying to kind of just meet the needs of the guests and visitors to the property. Maybe there's some monetization thought going on there through roaming or advertising, but the intent is really, the intent is really as an amenity service to the guests. If you look at the guest and passenger networks in hotels or airlines, those networks are typically purpose-built, right, with the objective of engaging the guests and enabling services on the property. Internet access is almost certainly one of those services, right? But those networks are built for a reason, right? And then you kind of go even further to the other end of the spectrum towards resident networks, multifamily, student housing, senior living. Those networks are absolutely purpose-built, and the main purpose is really to deliver internet services to the tenants in those properties. And you could fill in a bunch of other venue types along that spectrum: QSR, retail, major venue, stadium type venues, but you get the point. That is, the networks are built for reasons that align with the business of the property or the venue owners, right? Certainly the technology that comes along with these is made possible, the emergence of the technology Wi-Fi 6 and Passpoint, some of the security, advances, RADSEC comes to mind immediately. These technologies have made more transformative experiences possible, as it gets simpler. And Raj and Matt both highlighted, the need to make this easier. Chris touched on it as well, right? All of these things we know, and it's really the adoption and emergence of these latest round of technologies that make these transformative experiences possible. That said, the technologies are just technologies, right? And understanding why the networks have been built, what the needs of the property owners are, is prerequisite to designing a network that's built for purpose and implementing a user experience that enables the property owners to kind of meet their objectives, right? So again, the theme of the session here, transforming public and guest Wi-Fi, and this presentation specifically focused on creating value for network owners. We're going to take a focus on guest networks that are built for purpose, whether it's hotels, airlines, transportation, MDU. We're going to take a look at these, more purpose-built networks. And I guess where I would start is that these are investments. The Wi-Fi infrastructure, the communications infrastructure is brought into the property as an investment. It's budgeted, it's amortized, it's measured. It is absolutely considered an asset to the property as they value the properties. And again, primary objective in these cases is to engage guests or passengers or residents and deliver experiences for the venue, at the venue. In most cases, especially in kind of hospitality and airline, those experiences are highly measured. There's always surveys, there's guest satisfaction scores, and there is no shortage of feedback from end users as to the quality of the experience. And the folks who are responsible for delivering those experiences are scored on that and deliver, are held to SLAs for guest satisfaction and performance. So it's quite a specific thing that these networks are built for. As we look at Wi-Fi 6, Passpoint, and some of the more the more contemporary implementation technology, the adoption of those technologies has the ability to really impact customer satisfaction. It has the ability to improve brand loyalty. And when those two things happen, especially for venues that are driven by bookings and occupancy, you get rebooking rates. You get people booking with the same airline because they had a great experience, and that the Wi-Fi that served up the in-flight entertainment and the internet access was really reliable and really stable. You get folks coming back to their same hotels over and over because the quality of the internet service was high, the quality of the connected experience on the properties was high, right? And that rebooking is probably the greatest value that you can bring to the venue owners, right? The adoption of the same technologies that enabled the on-property experience, those primary use cases create the opportunity for secondary value, additional value. And probably the one that is maybe not been adopted the most, or the most untapped opportunity, is to extend guest experience beyond the venue. So venue owners and their service provider partners have made these investments into identity database integration, integrating with the loyalty program, deploying and operating Passpoint profile management services like Chris talked about earlier, right? You've done all the work to really be engaged with your guest and get those devices connected. and the opportunity to extend your influence or your engagement or impression on your guests is, guests really appreciate the opportunity to go out and be connected in the city, be connected at venues around the location they're at, or have gotten connectivity on the transit systems along the way, whether it's airports or trains that have taken them to and from the property, maybe where they're staying. So the opportunity to leverage the identity integration and the profile management to extend an experience beyond the walls of the venue is a tremendous opportunity for loyalty and guest satisfaction. Right. One of my favorite use cases in this theme is, folks who travel a lot. Kishore mentioned it. You fly a ton. You're coming off the plane. You're walking, or a lot of times running, walking aggressively to the curb, and you're trying to book your Uber at the same time, and you get to the edge of the airport, and you think you booked it. You're not quite sure you booked it. You've lost connectivity, and you're not exactly sure what your car assignment is or if it's coming or not, right? And there's this few moments of anxiety there where you're not sure, and that's just an example of a break in the connected experience. So the opportunity to sponsor connectivity is it really can add value beyond the walls of the venue, right? Network monetization, we're starting to get now into themes that are probably a little more considered or contemplated by venue owners, and some of the options there. We obviously have talked a lot about roaming as an opportunity for venue owners, for network owners, ad-supported, personalized guest engagement. There's all kinds of opportunities to take the asset and find ways to monetize. Those options include different levels of friction, and those options don't need to be mutually exclusive, as Chris made reference to, right? There are techniques and solutions available to combine a really good connectivity experience, take the friction out of that without completely abandoning the opportunity to have an impression on the guests or on the users, right? And then I think probably another major opportunity for value is in the analytics. The more connected devices you have, the more automated that connectivity is. The more devices you have, the better the efficacy and the data that allows venue owners to get better venue analytics, which are obviously becoming more and more important now as venues are held responsible for occupancy, in public spaces and these sorts of things. So the ability to get devices on board, to get devices connected without forcing users to participate in that process has a huge opportunity in guest analytics. Right. I think that the big question on the property owner's mind, on the network owner's mind, is how do I strike the right balance? I have this asset. I built it for a reason. I want to engage my guests. I want to deliver the information and solve for the use cases that I have as a property owner. I would also like to monetize if I can, right? And so it's a little bit of a balance here. And what you want is a seamless connectivity experience for the users. Chris talked about the notion of seamless. You want to be able to have that seamless experience without forfeiting the digital engagement that in a lot of cases brands have spent millions or even tens of millions developing and cultivating, right? The good news is the technology that's available to us now really makes those opportunities possible and gives us some of the tools that we need to achieve that balance, right? And again, it's partners who understand the property owner's use cases and objectives, who also understand the technology, that are important to getting the right balance for the property owners. Okay. So if we think about experience, right, and the feeling that we want users to have, you kind of think about the friction points or the engagement points. And if we break it down, the number one biggest friction point in all of this is device onboarding. How do I get the devices initialized and configured to participate in the connected experience, right? And this is where, you know, if you lose the user, if you lose the guest in this journey, it's hard to get them back. And, you know, we've all seen this. If it's not intuitive, the juice isn't worth the squeeze for the user, and they just, you know, they move on. They're not likely to come back to this, right? And what's important in this context is to engage the users in a number of different ways, in places and in journeys that are natural to them in the context of the venue or the brand or the interaction, right? So if it's an email engagement with a QR code or a link, if it's a web portal when they initially visit the venue, integration with mobile apps to take identity and automatically deploy profiles. One solution, one approach rarely is it the solution, the complete solution. Rarely do you get the level of adoption pull through that you need to have to really execute your strategy here, right? So onboarding is really the biggest point of friction. It's where you spend a lot of energy really understanding how users interact with the venue and how users interact with the brand. The one that's probably the most known and repeated and measured and gets the most feedback is the connected experience at the venue. The survey highlighted the fact that, you know, speed wasn't necessarily the most important thing. It was how intuitive was my connectivity, how much friction was presented to me. Performance is certainly important, but, you know, what's my experience when I come into the venue for the first time, or I leave and come back to the venue in the course of a day? Does that stuff just work for me, right? And does it work in a way that the venue owners have an opportunity to deliver the information that they need to the users, deliver venue information, or have an impression upon the users in a way that, you know, doesn't abandon their opportunity or ignore their opportunity to connect with their guests, right? And then, you know, as I mentioned, beyond the venue, what happens as you're transitioning in and out of the venue? Do I have good handoff? Am I using technologies or supporting roaming with mobile operators or MVNOs that allow my users to have a good transition experience coming in and out, right? I think we need to look at connectivity more holistically and consider the guest experience on a more, you know, macro basis, as opposed to just solving for, can I deliver good Wi-Fi in room 402, right, of this property, or in unit 310 of this multifamily unit? It really is a more comprehensive view on connected experience, right? And so in order to achieve that experience, you know, there are really a few key points that you have to take into account. And I would say the biggest one, the single biggest one, is identity, user identity, right? The user identity establishes the context for the services that a user is entitled to at a property, right? And those, you know, at the same time, a user might be a guest of the property and have an identity in that context. I'm, you know, Joe Bloggs, I'm registered in room 402, and I'm my last name, and I'm entitled to this service as a walk-up, let's call, user. I might also be a loyalty program member entitled to a higher level of service. Certainly, I'm probably a subscriber of a mobile operator, and that mobile operator may or may not have, you know, I may or may not have a roaming agreement at the property that allows me to connect to the Wi-Fi there. Broadband customers, loyalty programs, it would be, you know, not unreasonable to think that a single user has a half dozen different identities that an entitlement to service might be built around. So figuring out how to identify the user and extend service based on their identity, certainly probably the biggest point. The second, kind of big factor here is, given the identity of the users, what are the objectives of the property owner? Do I want my visitors to be on a network that gives them control through their mobile app, maybe, of the thermostat and other devices in their room? More of a prop tech position. If I have a user roaming in, can I correlate a roaming user with their room assignment to give them the right control? So you have to think about that and how you deliver those types of services in context, right? As a property owner or a brand owner or a brand manager, do I want to drive engagement and adoption of my loyalty program or my mobile app? What do I, as a property, want the experience to be, or need the experience to be, to satisfy my own objectives, right? So that's kind of the second big factor. The identity, what types of experiences do I deliver to users in a particular context? And then certainly, kind of underlying all of it is technology readiness. Are my networks capable of, have I made a sufficient investment in the networks to enable Passpoint, to have the right identity integrations? Are the user devices that are coming to the property, do I know that they're capable of supporting Passpoint or Passpoint Release 2 or Passpoint Release 3? So having an understanding of the device mix in the property also is a factor in allowing property owners to think about the pace or prioritization of the investment. I think the great news for all of us is that, we've kind of seen the adoption curve get to a point now where we can make some reasonable assumptions that the majority of devices coming into a venue, whether it's, planes, trains, or automobiles, is sufficient for us to deliver an enhanced user experience. All right, kind of skipping through my automations here. And then kind of just to wrap it all up, right? If a user has to participate in the connectivity experience, we're probably doing it wrong, right? That good connected experience is felt, not encountered. And so the ability to engage with users in a natural way, as we've been talking about here, the use of potentially more than one technology to achieve that experience. Kishore had a great slide with all the technology on it, kind of at the end of his presentation, and we certainly believe that as well. Wi-Fi is, absolutely kind of proving itself to be the anchor technology for connected experience, especially as it relates to internet connectivity. But the entire connected experience might leverage, Bluetooth, Zigbee, or Z-Wave for IoT solutions in the property. Cellular services are, likely best delivered via a 4G, 5G signal inside the building, in-building wireless, whether it's licensed spectrum in the case of a DAS or unlicensed spectrum in the case of CBRS, right? To deliver voice and text services. That's certainly a use case that we hear a ton from our MDU venue partners, where the connected guest experience, once somebody is a tenant, is certainly achievable. They're onboarded to the right network. We're supporting voice over Wi-Fi calling profiles for the carriers, and they're able to do pretty much everything they want to do. But new potential tenants or potential residents visiting the building who aren't on those networks, if they're losing the cell service, if it's perceived to have lost cell service on the property, then that's, that can be a barrier to just getting, to sales in terms of signing on new residents or tenants to the property. So a combination of technologies, certainly are in play here to deliver the right guest experience. And then, kind of tying that all together, there's those different technologies, we've seen over time a lot of overlay networks in the building. We have the guest internet, the tenant internet access. We have a separate overlay system for public safety. We have a separate overlay system for IoT. The real value of the network as an asset comes when we're able to converge the infrastructure to support all those use cases, right? And that takes a little bit of thought, a little bit of planning, but more and more we see the opportunity to have the network and have the wireless infrastructure as a true asset in the property, just like, an investment in Windows is an asset on the property, just like you have, good electrical service throughout the property, a quality communications infrastructure in the property that handles all of your use cases becomes more efficient over the life of the property and just more efficient operationally for the owner. So it really kind of brings additional value into the asset. So that's the the look at it from a creating value. The value doesn't always need to be monetization. I think one of the questions asked was, should property owners really be thinking about monetization? Property owners should be thinking about value. And if they're able to take monetization as an option and an opportunity and get the right balance with value delivered to their guests, their ability to meet their own objectives, then that's really what we're looking for. Certainly monetization in some of these sectors right now, airlines and hospitality in particular, maybe revenue generation, you dial it in a little bit more towards revenue generation than you do guest experience just out of necessity. But these solutions need to have that kind of tunability, I would say, to dial in the experience that you want, given the environment that you're in. So happy to take questions at this point.
Yeah, thank you, Blaze. Yeah, great presentation again. You are going to be joining us for the virtual panel session, so I'm going to ask you to stay up on our virtual stage for now.
Sure.
And yeah, but I'm just going to ask one or two questions, and then perhaps we can take a few more through the panel. So one question here, what role do you see other wireless technologies playing in the future of the guest experience?
Yeah, I think I hit on it there at the end. There are different use cases that lend themselves to different technologies, and for us to sit here and say Wi-Fi is the only thing that anybody ever needs to deliver the right experiences at a property or in a venue is just disingenuous. So we look at use cases that require maybe have a really high security layer or high control requirement, security cameras, access controls might be something like that. The IoT ecosystem is kind of all over the place right now, but it might be the property's preference for a particular brand of door lock or thermostat that drives the incorporation of a particular technology. We see a lot of movement in this space where the Wi-Fi OEMs are extending their products to function more as an IoT hub through Zigbee or Z-Wave radios or plugins via Bluetooth or USB dongles into APs and this sort of thing. We see more and more APs with PoE out support, so that when it's time to deploy a CBRS radio or CBRS service throughout the property, we have the right switching and backhaul stuff already accounted for, and we really can just place radios, where they need to be based on design. So we see, all kinds of opportunity for other technologies, but don't see Wi-Fi at any risk of diminished importance.
Yep. Okay. Perfect, thank you. So yeah, so we'll have you back for the panel in about 30 minutes, I think. We should move on to our next speaker. Also, just to remind the audience, if you have any questions, please use the questions tab that you should have in front of you on your screen as well. Yeah, so without further ado, our next speaker is Jonas Bjorklund. Jonas is CTO for Aptillo Networks, and he's going to be talking about how making B2B Wi-Fi scale. Okay, Jonas, over to you.
See now if I can share my screen.
The first challenge.
Yeah.
But you weren't muted, so you.
You can hear me?
Yes, loud and clear.
Now I hope you can see it in presentation mode.
Perfect.
Thank you, Steve. And thank you everybody else for a nice presentation so far. It's been interesting to listen to you guys. So I will talk about B2B Wi-Fi as in a service provider offering a B2B Wi-Fi service to enterprises of different types and how to make that scale and the challenge of that. For somebody that's not familiar with Aptilo Networks, we are a Wi-Fi service management software solution provider. We provide our service both through as a software on-prem to an operator, as well as a cloud service for the ones that wish that option. And we deliver to mobile and fixed operators, Wi-Fi operators around the world with our software. I'd like to make a case that it's a really good time now with a lot of things coming together at the same time for operator B2B Wi-Fi to make it happen. One thing to start with is that high capacity indoor coverage is needed more than ever with the expectation from users that previous speakers as well have addressed very nicely. We have Wi-Fi 6 now, which is really providing essential improvements from a service provider point of view. Operator services expect an improved quality, added bandwidth, added QoS features that we've been given now with Wi-Fi 6, which is really suitable for the operators specifically, I would say, in order to offer a consistent service. Wi-Fi 6E, we've talked about that, 6 gigahertz, a lot of spectrum there coming available in big parts of the world, hopefully more or less everywhere. And that's also a big opportunity to seize and use for B2B enterprise Wi-Fi services. And if somebody is a mobile operator, there are plans for 5G, and there's a clear drive for Wi-Fi as an extension that's also been mentioned to 5G, and the convergence, and I think a focus on the user experience. Like it's been mentioned, as a user, you don't really care how your device, how your IoT devices are connected, which radio they're using. You care about your experience, that is easy to use, the onboarding and the quality of the service. But that's driving an interest in Wi-Fi, and you want to get those sites out as an operator. You want to have the footprint and access to that, and offering a profitable B2B Wi-Fi service is a way to get that done, to get into enterprises environments and get Wi-Fi networks deployed where you have an ability to mix in your with your Wi-Fi with your 5G experience as well. Then the IoT revolution, where Wi-Fi is going to be a critical, or it is a critical part of delivering that experience and connecting all of our millions of devices that we are going to see connecting both in the home, in the enterprise, more so on the run while traveling, while visiting different types of sites. We're going to bring along lots of IoT devices that we expect to be connected and that stay connected throughout. And then with the help of different types of communities and organizations like WBA here with OpenRoaming initiative, is really offering value to the Wi-Fi community, offering value to an operator, as well as to the enterprise, driving the need and the opportunity of B2B Wi-Fi. So getting into how to scale, I made this picture, pillars of B2B Wi-Fi growth. What do we need to have in place? I'd say there are three main objects. One is that an operator offering an enterprise service, the Wi-Fi service management probably is not going to be the only thing you're offering. You're offering broadband connectivity, you offer various other services. IoT is a big field where you as an operator can come into an enterprise and offer different types of services, devices, and so on that are connected. And obviously your Wi-Fi service, your user experience for Wi-Fi, your IoT service need to fit with the rest of the offering. It should be ordered the same way. It should be something where you're built consistently as an enterprise for all the different types of services you get from your operator. So that's one key pillar, that it's something that is delivered in a nice orchestration with the other enterprise services that you have. Another one is, of course, the local market fit and the different verticals, types of enterprises out there, ranging from the hospitality industry to we talked about stadiums before that are starting maybe to fill up in the post-COVID area again, hopefully. Very good presentation from Boingo on the airport specifically, that use case. So as an operator offer this service, you need to have a solution that target the needs of those different types of markets. And they're not the same all over the world. There are different requirements in different parts of the world as well. Also the SME market with the small restaurants, the bar, local hairdresser, whatever, where you provide a Wi-Fi connectivity service into the enterprise, needs its own set of features, and user experience obviously needs to be what Blas talked about, the right balance between value for the venue owner and value for the end user, and simplicity for the end user. Obviously, where Open Roaming is offering a nice way of getting people connected in an easy, secure way, also avoiding the challenges of macro randomization, which would otherwise, be a problem going forward, maybe for connecting users, recognizing users coming back to a network. And then the other part is really the efficient operation of it all, that this needs to be automated. It needs to be as much as possible self-management for the enterprise, so that you as an operator do not have to spend an overly amount of operational resources on expanding this network, on maintaining this network, and running this service for your B2B customers. So I think that's based on a high performance platform that can scale with the challenge here, scale from a performance capacity point of view, but also scale in terms of meeting those demands from those different things that you need to have in place for scaling this service. Multi-tenancy, obviously, you're going to want to give every enterprise customer their own set of features, their own insights and analytics, their own user experience as an enterprise using this service. Some of them might not care very much. It's a simple thing that they need. Others are more elaborate, would like to integrate their own systems, have an API-driven approach so that they can integrate with hotel property management systems, or integrate with visiting systems, different types of, in the airport industry, obviously there are lots of systems that needs to be integrated with the network and the connectivity. So multi-tenancy obviously is a key in the platform part. Also multi-vendor, different access points, different network solutions fit different types of enterprises, sizes, outdoor, indoor, different parts of the world is going to be slightly different. Also, sometimes you want to come in as an operator and offer a service on top of an existing network, so you can't really choose what type of vendor is in this location. So I believe you need a platform that can deal with and make smooth operation in a multi-vendor environment as well. I mentioned self-management. Basically, it's key both for the experience of the enterprise, but also for you as an operator to put as much daily maintenance and configuration in the hands of your enterprise that is easy to use for them, where they can do what they need to do, but not the technical stuff that you want to give them as a service. And everything needs to be automated in order to reduce the operational costs. So I think other people have talked to, and Aptilo as well in many other sessions have talked, I guess, about the fit to the total B2B offering and the market fit and the whole monetization user experience bit. So I thought I'll take two examples of efficient operation considerations and focus in on the operational part today. Obviously, I could talk forever about the other things as well, but I'll go on with operations. So my first example, I have two, is is a scenario where you are going after a small enterprise, thousands of tens of thousands of small enterprises that you want to have provide a service to. And so, yeah, lots of access points, but very few per customer. How do you make that scale from an operational point of view? And there are obviously multiple challenges with that. And I'll talk about one specific challenge now. So you will have customers that with limited technical skills. And imagine now in this scenario that these guys, they have their own Wi-Fi equipment, they have their own Wi-Fi network that they want to connect to your operator service to provide the user experience in their network. So that's what they're looking for, how to onboard their own Wi-Fi equipment. I mean, in some cases, the operator will ship and install the Wi-Fi equipment, and that's different. But in this scenario, we have many different AP vendors out there. And basically that means that we need some onboarding tool for these guys, how to get them onto the service. And that can be a very error-prone activity. It can be very difficult to make that happen. And you'll end up spending a lot of time from customer service to help these enterprises onboard your service. So if we look at what it would do in a traditional way, in the history, how it's been done, you basically have your customer service running, operating and managing your AAA radius service where you want to onboard a new B2B customer. And typically the first thing you will have to ask them is, what's your IP address? Can you connect to my AAA? I have no idea. I'll try to find out, will be the typical response. And eventually they come back and might give you an IP address of their access point. Okay, you go away and do your configuration in the customer service department, configure it to be ready to talk to them, give them a radius secret so that they have a way of connecting. And after some time, yeah, it's not working, they're having problems. And you have to eventually help them get online and get their site connected. And if they are using a dynamic IP address, obviously as that changes, there will be a problem if you're using the traditional connectivity between a radius client in the access point and a AAA at the other side. So that's not a very happy scenario. And that will obviously not scale as your number of customers takes off, so will your customer support effort, and the time spent is going to cost you a lot of money as an operator to try to deal with this situation. So a different approach that we suggest, I mean, there are multiple ways of solving this, but do it all online as a self-service. Ask the customer in the offering, once they decide to sign up online, they complete an online form. You generate a verification to identify their identity, verify their contract number, and send them a link that they can continue the process. In the back end, there's a dynamic entry created. And once that's done, they're sent configuration instructions to their specific access point that they have or controller. This is what you need to do to get your network online. They configure, and the backend system is matching everything. And they are online and it's up and running. So sort of a streamlined user experience for onboarding a multi-vendor access point scenario where somebody's able to get online for authenticating to the service. And with the IP address change, it's not used for identifying the network. Instead, the backend system is should be adapting to that and make sure that the new IP address is also working just fine. And with that, it's all automated, it's online, it's self-managed, it scales much better, and you can roll this out across your market, targeting many more enterprises than you otherwise would be able to do. So that was the sort of a specific feature that you could use to onboard in the small enterprise scenario, a specific use case. Another scenario is you're going after to provide a service for large multi-tenant locations. whether they are inhabited by regular enterprises or they are inhabited by students in a student campus, or if they're regular apartments with tenants and families living there. Basically, the challenge here is that if you go in as a service provider and build a Wi-Fi network in these buildings, in these large buildings, and you want to provide a service, obviously there's a lot of customers leaving and coming, and the whole provisioning of them and onboarding of them needs to be easy and automated. And the trick there is really to implement a multi-level service management. So in at least 2 levels, offer a managed offering to these venues, to these large sites. And basically view your B2B customers as sort of a virtual service provider and put the tools in their hands so that they can manage their tenants rather than you have to do that as an operator. So put tools in place for them, ideally integrated with the systems they already use to keep track of their tenants in their property, and have those being possible for them to onboard them, have the schedule for how long they should have access to this network and what the rules and policies for each one of the tenants should be. Assign them, if that's the way you want to deliver the service, assign them to a private VLAN so that all the users, all the devices in that family or in that enterprise that is a tenant in the property, they have access to each other's devices. They are on the same virtual LAN, which means they will experience this as if they have their own network in a shared Wi-Fi infrastructure. And it becomes a uniform and scalable way for an operator to sell B2B Wi-Fi to these type of sites. And it basically works so that you have separate VLANs for each tenant, and they are separated in one building. In multiple buildings, they can reconnect into the same building and have access. And it, like I mentioned, it would appear to them as if they have their own network where they can connect between devices. It will be a shared infrastructure, but everybody have their own virtual network where they can use the service. So that was 2 very different examples of how to minimize the operational costs. And obviously there are key tools that you need as an operator to go after the B2B market, and you need to know what you're addressing and what you're going after, and put the tools in place in order to do it automated and efficient for yourself as an operator. So I think I'll stop there and not go through more examples in for the purpose of saving some time. Steve.
Yeah, thank you, Jonas. Yeah, no, again, great presentation. We do have some questions coming through, actually. I think more along the lines of, I guess, sort of the enterprise versus the operator. So in your presentation, you described a scenario of onboarding small enterprises that manage their own Wi-Fi networks. How does that differ in a scenario where the operator provides managed Wi-Fi as a service? So that was our first question.
Yeah, okay. I think I mentioned that. So in this scenario that I described, and that specific function of onboarding, it was the enterprise's own equipment. They have their own Wi-Fi network that the operator wants to connect back to the service. Obviously, if they deploy for a small enterprise just a broadband gateway with Wi-Fi, they will have full control to configure that, and as they ship it, it's onboarded to the service, and the service is enabled by the operator that way. So that's a lot easier in a way if you have the tools in place to deploy that service. Or even if it's a larger network, if you as an operator go there and do radio analysis, how to deploy the Wi-Fi network on behalf of the enterprise, you will have your own technician there that needs tools in order to onboard his solution, of course, to the enterprise service himself. But it's kind of a different scenario, so that's a valid question.
Okay. And let's take one more question. So in your example of self-management shows how the enterprise has access to manage tenants in the network. What could other self-management use cases be?
Well, the enterprise will want to manage a lot of things. I think Blas mentioned many of them, like what connectivity options should be there, what authentication options. Do I want to have open roaming turned on or not? If there's a captive portal, what should be in that? Do I want to have some monetization features? Do I want to use some advertising? Do I want to ask a survey for a period of time where I collect information about the visitors? All of those configurations and sort of designing the service should be self-service for the enterprise. You don't want them to, obviously to have to interact with the operator in a cumbersome way to control that. And the other self-service is if you can enable integration points for the enterprise, so that if you have more an advanced enterprise, you can allow them to to do integration to your APIs in order to do it that way and get a really tailored service for themselves.
Okay. Yeah, no, thank you very much, Joe. You're going to also join us for our panel in about I think about 25 minutes. So again, the opportunity for more questions. We should move on. We need to catch up a little bit. So next, I'd like to invite Bob Friday. He's a CTO from Juniper Networks. Juniper are one of the newest members to the WBA. So thank you, Bob, for taking that decision. Yeah, but over to you. Bob's going to be talking about food, shelter, power, and mobile internet.
Okay, well, thank you, Steve, for having me. I've always been a big fan of the WBA, so I'm happy to be back again. And maybe a quick sound check, Steve. Slide sound, everything okay?
Yeah, a little bit tinny, perhaps. I'm not sure if we can do anything. But...
How's that? Any better? Let me just move. See if I can get it slightly better.
You're audible. It's just I think the quality maybe I don't know if you can improve it slightly, but
okay. Well, let me get started here and try to get you back on schedule here.
You're good. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So for those who know me, I started my career in Wi-Fi back in the early 2000s when I co-founded a company called Airspace. I would say back then, Wi-Fi was what we called a nice to have. It was very hard to sell. We've come a long way since then. I sold that company to Cisco. I would say while I was at Cisco, we saw Wi-Fi go from what I call a nice to have to a must have. We also had Passpoint come out in the 2011 timeframe and started the journey of really converging this Wi-Fi cellular space. I left Cisco in 2014 to start another company called Mist. And that was really based on a couple of market and technology transitions I saw happening out on that. And one of those transitions was really seeing Wi-Fi kind of move from this must-have to business critical. And this is really more beyond just Wi-Fi. This is really around mobile internet. These were businesses that were starting to put, critical customer guest experiences on their Wi-Fi networks. And there was a couple of things I heard from these customers while I was at Cisco, and it was really around what they really wanted was more reliability. As they started to put their guests and customers onto these Wi-Fi networks, they really needed what they called end-to-end visibility, right? They really needed, it wasn't good enough to know if the Wi-Fi network was up. What they really needed was some sort of end-to-end visibility, whether that user is having a good experience or not. And this is where AI came into the picture. So the other two technology transitions I've seen is really around cloud and AI. And AI is really kind of speaking to that SLA component, right? How do we make sure that if we're going to converge these networks and you're going to get on this network, that this end user is going to have a good experience? So I think we're going to see AI become another critical piece on this journey into a converged Wi-Fi cellular network experience. The other interesting thing is, I'd say, is I was just recently participated in a industry CTO government agency roundtable. What's becoming very clear is really around this mobile internet concept. There's a couple of concepts. One, governments are starting to realize that mobile internet is kind of a economic human necessity, right? For country to be successful, they need to make sure that they have great internet connectivity in their country and their citizens have access to this. And a couple of interesting stats that came out of that discussion was, you look at electricity, water, about 90% of the world's population now has access to electricity and clean water. It's hard to believe that still 10% don't have electricity or clean water. So we're not quite there on the basic necessities. But mobile internet is up to 66%, according to Cisco's latest analysis that we're going to be up to 60% of the population will have access to mobile internet going forward. The other thing you kind of see in this data is really around the internet, IoT. And in addition to connecting people to the internet, we're going to be connecting more and more things to the internet. And that's going to have to be done securely and seamlessly. And so I think we're also going to see cars and other devices. We're going to be looking for internet connectivity across any network they can get their hands on. And that's the other theme of around people just want to make sure that their devices are connected to the internet, whether it's Wi-Fi, cellular, and whatever network's available. And I would say the other thing that came out of that discussion was really this concept of network of network. It's not going to be a single network. We're going to have Wi-Fi networks for wide area, local areas, cellular networks wide area, and we're going to have PAN networks for personal area concepts that we have to basically move between different networks going forward. The other interesting thing is spectrum policy. You can kind of see it happening. If you look at the Cisco's latest data, 51% of all internet traffic is going to be across some Wi-Fi network, and then about 20% is going to be across our cellular networks. And that's kind of really driving the spectrum policy we're seeing coming out of our governments. And we've seen that recently with the shared spectrum, right? As we move to more of a mobile internet world, all this is being built on a very fixed resource that we're going to have to figure out how to use more efficiently. So we're going to see more networks built on license, more networks built on shared spectrum, and we're going to see more CBRS networks built, and we're going to see Wi-Fi become a bigger component of carrying most of the traffic, video traffic, right? When you go home, all that video traffic in your house is being carried across a Wi-Fi network, because that'd be a waste of licensed spectrum to use licensed spectrum for carrying all that YouTube and video traffic we watch at night. And this here kind of represents, what I'm seeing personally with the enterprise. I've worked with the WBA in the past while at Cisco. I would say we are truly becoming, the enterprises are truly becoming aware of Wi-Fi becoming a business critical asset. I'm working some very large retails where, Wi-Fi and hotspot are already part of their strategy, where they already support Passpoint inside their retail store. But they're looking for better movement between, putting private or public LTE in their parking lots, right? And when you look at education, we're starting to see private LTE, CBRS starting to become a key part of, when we have students that are in the school, how do we provide remote internet? So you're starting to see private LTE driving Wi-Fi hotspots, right? And so there's much more discussion in education. How do we make sure that's seamless for students and teachers to be able to move between their cellular networks and their Wi-Fi networks and these hotspots that they may be able to get home. In the healthcare space, I'm working with several big hospitals right now where same thing. They want this patient experience where patient starts their experience from home, and that experience goes all the way from home to the parking lot, into the hospital, to the doctor's office. All that requires kind of a seamless experience as we move from one space to another space. So I think the enterprises are now ready for Hotspot 2.0. I think one of our efforts at the WBA is really helping educate. This is why when I look at open roaming and what Google's doing with the Ryan Wi-Fi, I think we did a lot of work to really make it, to standardize the connection between the client and the AP with Passpoint and .11u. Really the next piece of work to be done is what Google is focusing on, what open roaming is focused on, is really standardizing, how do we put these roaming agreements in place? How do we make it easy for an enterprise to accept credentials from anyone who walks into their building? And this is kind of, when I look at open roaming, I think open roaming is coming into its day now. It's been kind of a long journey, for those who've been on it for the last 10 years. But I think these two worlds are slowly coming together. And working with the operators on 3GPP and 5G, they're definitely starting to see the need to be able to make it easier to keep their guests and their customers connected to the internet. I mean, ultimately, a customer does not care particularly how he gets to the internet. What they really want is they want their operator or their provider to basically keep them connected best they can. Most of us will prefer cellular for our voice calls, but if we cannot get cellular, we would prefer, we will take a Wi-Fi call if necessary. So on the video side, I think the same thing is true, right? We look at the spectrum requirements. You're not going to want to carry all that video traffic on your licensed spectrum. You're going to want to carry that on these unlicensed Wi-Fi bands for most of the video traffic. So that's where I think Open Roaming and Passpoint and Google Wi-Fi roaming is really going to be doing, the country a service of helping getting these two worlds and keeping, making it easier for citizens to connect to the internet anywhere they're at. An interesting data point I found also was really, this also came from Marvis and Cisco annual report, is, you look at where we're headed right now, it is clear that Wi-Fi capacity leveraging the unlicensed band is going to be a big part of offloading the licensed networks. And this is where I think we play a big role in helping get these two worlds converge, right? How do we make it easier for our devices to securely connect to whatever network they need to do, depending on what use case they're trying to do? And this is going to increasingly become true with our cars. So I think going forward, I'm proud to be back to the WBA, proud to be able to get my shoulder back and pushing the rock up the hill and helping. I would say this is one of my passions, converging Wi-Fi cellular has been one of those passions. AI, indoor location, wireless, anything like that, feel free to reach out to me, and thanks for having me, Steve.
Yeah, no, thank you, Bob, for your personal contributions probably over the last 20 years to this Wi-Fi ecosystem and what you're doing now. It's great to have you back in the fray in the WBA as well. So we're looking forward to working with you and moving this forward. A few questions come in. Maybe we can take some of these in now. So back to the enterprise scenario. So from an enterprise venues perspective, what matters the most when it comes to the public Wi-Fi experience they deliver to the people inside those venues? So can you take a stab at that one?
I think, for the, like I mentioned, for the enterprises I'm working with right now, Wi-Fi and more importantly, the internet connectivity is becoming business critical. Whether it's a robot in a distribution center or an associate, trying to help someone out in the parking lot, or a guest inside the hotel or the retail space, the enterprises really want to know that they have good connectivity, right? This is that end to end. So I think it's important, and I think AI is going to play a big role in this, whether it's an operator or an enterprise, is how do we ensure that an end user actually has good connectivity from their device to the internet? So I think that's going to be the, that's what we're doing at Mist right now, and that's what's resonating right now with some of our biggest enterprise customers.
Okay, thank you. And I think that also resonates with the poll earlier. So very good. Okay. So moving on. So again, another new member to the WBA that joined earlier in the year. We have Brian Jacks. We heard from Brian over the summer congress. So Brian's the CEO at Y-Connect, and he's here to talk about realizing revenue from advertising. So Brian, can you take us away?
All right. So thank you, Steve. It's always a pleasure to speak at WBA events, and I loved it in the summer and looking forward to this one as well. So I'm Brian Jacks. I'm the CEO of Y-Connect. I'm excited to share ways we work with network owners and operators to generate revenue from advertising. Oops, let me just, right. So at Y-Connect, we're changing ad tech by offering network owners, advertisers, and programmatic ad platforms new ways to optimize effectiveness. We differentiate ourselves by combining our network background with ad tech expertise. We really desire to assist network owners in transitioning Wi-Fi networks from cost centers to profit centers. One person put it, we are at the cross-section of networking and ad tech. We primarily focus in 3 areas. Wi-Fi onboarding technologies, and we saw that a large part of the audience was interested in that. We have an intelligent, advanced captive service that can be integrated into a MSP's service via APIs and endpoints. We also have an app that can be an SDK for both open and secure networks like Passpoint networks that really improves Wi-Fi onboarding. Second, our intelligent, flexible user experience or captive portal is fully integrated into our advanced advertising platform to optimize revenue generation. Now, these first two areas of expertise are primarily to assist us in achieving our #1 objective, which is the third item on this slide, generating revenue for our customers that own, manage, and operate networks. As we say it, it's a simple idea. It's your network, your users, it should be your revenue. Today, I want to share how we generate revenue. Whoops, sorry about that. How we generate revenue through advertising. 1 second here, I got something popping up here. So today I'll dive into 3 areas we generate revenue from advertising. We're going to discuss revenue generation through the Wi-Fi onboarding process, retargeting, and a new area that we've identified or introduced in the summer that we call traffic revenue generation. I'll dive into each source of revenue, starting with revenue generation through Wi-Fi onboarding. Now, I'm not sure how many are familiar with the big rock, small rocks, and sand illustration. You know, I recall attending time management training, and they used the following illustration. The facilitator provided everyone a jar, some big rocks, small rocks, and sand. The goal was to get as much in the jar as possible. Big rocks represented the important things we do throughout the day. Small rocks represented the tasks that are less important, and sand represented all those necessary activities throughout the day, like calls, emails, eating. Well, you probably already identified the goal of the exercise, which is to first place the big rocks in the jar, then the small rocks, and then the sand. And if you start with the sand, because if you start with the sand, the full, you know, the jar will get full and there won't be any room for the rocks. Well, we like to maximize revenue similarly with this example, and I'll just share quickly. We always want to prioritize what we call sponsorship sales, represented by the big rocks. It is nirvana to secure a big advertiser to purchase all of your advertising inventory month after month, year after year. Everyone desires the big sale, but sponsorship can be elusive. Most Wi-Fi operators that offer only sponsorship can only fill about 20 to 50% of their advertising inventory. It can generate good revenue, but the more inventory you have, the harder it is to fill with only sponsorship advertising. It is an advertising approach where everyone who uses the Wi-Fi service sees the exact same ad, which is really not efficient for most advertisers. But then we have what we call the small rocks, and they represent what we refer to as targeted sales. Being able to target advertising to certain demographic audiences, this type of advertising is very efficient for advertisers. It can generate substantial revenue, but you have to have a platform that can target to specific demographic audiences and ideally generate first-party data segments for these audiences. Examples of audiences are male versus female, basketball fans, or those that enjoy gardening, travelers, and I could go on. YConnect's platform not only generates first-party data or first-party data segments from network usage, but can direct advertising campaigns to those specific audience segments. Then there is SAN that represents programmatic advertising. This is where each device participates in an automated auction where within 200 to 300 milliseconds, the winning advertiser's ad is placed within the ad placement on the captive portal on a device. YConnect's platform is integrated with a number of ad platforms to facilitate these programmatic auctions. And our captive service allows us to generate programmatic advertising even on what most call the pre-auth page of a captive portal. At YConnect, we believe it is essential that all 3 of these advertising revenue generation capabilities are in place. And YConnect has the tools and capabilities to maximize onboarding revenue. You know, many platforms can accommodate sponsorship, and I explained programmatic advertising. But let's explore the effectiveness of targeted advertising. You know, Alex Stone, the SVP of Horizon Media, the largest independent ad agency in the US, shares, and I quote, accurate, transparent, privacy-compliant data that enables sophisticated targeting of audience and location segments is an essential aspect in delivering business outcomes to clients. His clients are advertisers that desire higher ROI from their advertising spend that can only be achieved through targeted advertising. Let me provide an example of the power of targeted advertising. Now, most advertisers show ads to get their message across. They desire to entice viewers of their ad to click or press so that they can be redirected to their website or to shop or engage with their messaging. It all starts with a click. The average click rate for ads on a page with other content is 0.06%. Now, we ran a campaign with an advertiser, Free People, a clothier for women. They targeted women ages, we targeted for them women ages 18 to 34, which was their desired audience. We received results that were 15 times higher than the average ad placed on the page with other content. What is better is that Free People shared that for those that clicked on the ad, 83% were new visitors to their website, where for their previous ad campaigns, only 43% were new visitors. But we took targeting a step further. We provided the Free People a pixel to add to their website, and we created a campaign targeted to those that previously visited their website. The click-through rate was 22%. Phenomenal results for the advertiser. And the level of revenue generated for each impression we showed was over 10 times higher than the average rate generated for a typical direct ad sale, and over 40 times higher than what is typically generated from a programmatic ad. Targeted advertising drives higher revenue and increased inventory rates. Now, I shared the big rock, small rock, and sand illustration, but I left out an element. After you fill the jar with rocks and sand, you can still add more to the jar if you add water. Retargeting represents adding that water to the jar. Let me explain retargeting. We place a pixel on the captive portal, our web page, which allows our demand-side platform to identify the devices that viewed the captive portal. Then we have the ability to find and deliver ads programmatically to those users when they are not on the network, but are using an app or browsing the internet wherever they are. Retargeting can be added to any captive portal, even captive portals for which we are not providing onboarding advertising. A perfect fit for hospitality or other captive portals where the network owner does not desire advertising on their UX, but desires to target their ads to users of their network when they're not on that network. Again, retargeting is like pouring water into the jar, expanding the ability to generate additional revenue. We're even leveraging our revenue generation abilities to expand coverage to the underserved and unconnected. We are partnering with Intelify in Brazil to address the digital divide. The YConnect platform is used by Intelify and Move On to sell advertising to offset the cost of improving Wi-Fi or providing Wi-Fi service in Rocinha, the first of what will be 150 favelas throughout Brazil. Favelas are basically neighborhoods that, most know them as urban slums. Just last month, this initiative was highlighted on national TV news in Brazil as residents of the community were ecstatic to have Wi-Fi service as an alternative to just cellular prepaid plans. Working with Intelify and their partners, Move On and ProData, free public Wi-Fi is being made available in public buses throughout São Paulo, Rio, Recife, and Florianopolis. Over the next 2 years, Wi-Fi will be available in more than 15,000 buses throughout these cities. At YConnect, we're happy to partner with organizations that seek to bridge the digital divide. The third new and exciting revenue stream I introduced on the July WBA Global Conference is traffic revenue generation, or what we call TRG. This technology is a bit complicated and difficult to understand if you're not well versed in how programmatic advertising works. But at a high level, users of any internet service view advertising. In 2020, it's estimated that globally $106 billion US will be spent on programmatic digital advertising. That advertising is delivered over Wi-Fi, mobile, and fixed networks that many that are attending this conference operate. But those companies that own these networks do not participate or benefit from this programmatic advertising activity. Additionally, we can identify ad IDs that can be used as a unique identifier. So if, or should I say when, companies like mobile activate MAC randomization as a default setting, we can assist MSPs to augment their platforms depending on MAC addresses to use ad IDs as a unique identifier, a very important component of the platform that we have. Y-Connect allows network owners and operators to benefit from this significant programmatic digital marketing activity. An important feature of our service and all of our advertising-based revenue generation offerings is that we never share any PII or personal identifiable information with any third parties. We never sell data. We use data and convert it into advertising revenue. To better explain TRG, programmatic advertising is solely dependent upon cookies that are deposited and accessed via browsers or ad IDs from apps. For an iOS device, it is a IDFA. For Androids, it's the Google Ad ID. Based on our pilots with global ad platforms, less than 40% of the time, these platforms receive the IDs they need to properly identify programmatic advertising. When a cookie or ID is not retrieved, the cost of the ad inventory is minimized. Y-Connect uses a patent-pending service called RTDM, or real-time data matching, where we match a unique identifier with the ad platform's cookies or ID to facilitate the matching that is so critical for programmatic performance. As shown within this illustration, using RTDM, we were able to facilitate matching at least 97% of the time. Because this service is so effective, ad platforms are willing to pay for this service. We then share the revenue with network owners, a new revenue stream for network owners and operators. But we're taking RTDM even further. RTDM can be used to improve advertising in connected TVs in the home. Again, it is at a very high level. The same way we identify and facilitate matching for the ad platform's ID to a Wi-Fi enabled device, we can correlate that Wi-Fi device's ID within a phone, tablet, or laptop with the connected TV that is served by the same home router. This approach allows us to work with ad platforms as well as streaming content providers to optimize programmatic advertising delivery. Again, these ad platforms and streaming services will pay to tap into this efficiency, and we share the revenue with network operators. We're working on a pilot with a service provider to demonstrate what can ultimately enable programmatic advertising delivered to connected TVs and anticipate commercial availability in 2021. Y-Connect's traffic revenue generation offering is a new way to generate advertising-based revenue, and it's applicable for Wi-Fi, fixed, and mobile networks. So just to recap, at Y-Connect, we offer a number of ways to generate revenue from advertising, whether through onboarding, retargeting, or TRG. We don't just offer a platform, but we generate revenue on your behalf. So thanks so much for your time. If anybody wants to explore any of the ways we generate revenue, please feel free to reach out to us. We have app platforms that are looking for networks to improve their programmatic effectiveness. So Steve, back to you.
Yeah, thank you, Brian. Yeah. Also, I think you're bringing a new, I guess, dimension to the set of presentations today. So a few questions did come through. Obviously, a big topic on privacy here. So privacy is a big issue these days. You mentioned with the various ways you generate revenue, data isn't shared. So can you elaborate a bit more on how you generate revenue without actually sharing the data?
Sure. I mean, there's a lot of companies out there that sell data. And when an ad platform uses it, it becomes third-party data. There are so many data sources that data is commoditized. The rates are low, so you can't really make a lot of money selling data. And nobody wants to do that because of the privacy issues. So, and the other thing is when you sell data, what's happening is somebody who's going to receive that data, they're the ones that are going to use that for advertising. So what we do is we just get rid of the middleman. So what we do is we just convert data into advertising revenue as opposed to selling it to somebody else, having to share that information so that they can convert it into advertising revenue. So the bottom line is we don't share PII. We target to audiences, not to individuals.
Okay. Yeah, another question here, Brian, on seamless connectivity. So they're asking if the traffic revenue generation service that you offer, can that be incorporated with open roaming?
Oh, absolutely. The short answer is just yes. I mean, at YConnect, we seek to work with network owners to maximize revenue generation. We believe that you want to have multiple layers of, or multiple revenue streams to generate revenue. So as I mentioned, it doesn't require a captive portal. We are creating revenue from the stream of, I'll say the use or the use of any sort of network, whether it's Wi-Fi, it's mobile, it's fixed. Bottom line is programmatic happens on those networks, and through a very easy integration, we're able to tap into that and provide revenue to any sort of network owner or operator.
Okay, thank you, Brian.
Sure.
We're going to move on. So again, thanks for your support also and decision to join our ecosystem this year. Our next presenter is Bernard Heskevy. He's the CEO and founder of NetExperience. NetExperience also joined the WBA 2 months back. So Bernard, thank you for that also. Bernard's going to be talking about open Wi-Fi platform for service providers. So Bernard, over to you.
Okay, hi everyone. Just give me a second to share the screen. Okay, can you see my screen?
Yes, we can. Yep, you're not in presenter mode just yet, but we can see it.
Okay. Okay, how about now?
Yep, perfect.
Okay, so good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Happy to be here and present a little bit about open Wi-Fi. We're also a relatively new, or actually quite a new WBA member, and quite excited to be part of this organization again, after, at least from my perspective, a long kind of like absence. And I think WBA has evolved quite a bit, and there are good things happening. My presentation is going to be focused on open Wi-Fi. Open Wi-Fi is an initiative and architecture driven by Telecom Infra Project, which is an ecosystem of about, I don't know, maybe about 50 service providers and a number of technology companies. And what they are trying to do is they are trying to innovate by disaggregating networks. So Open Wi-Fi would be a project related to Wi-Fi. They have Open RAN and Open this and Open that, various parts of networks. So, you know, all of us are here representing innovation from a certain kind of like angle. And that's the angle which was chosen by Telecom Infra Project. Just a little bit like Bob, I'm on my 4th company on Wi-Fi, and I thought I would never do another Wi-Fi company. But, you know, this opportunity for disaggregated Wi-Fi looked quite interesting. NetExperience, which is the company, we're a software company. The team, including myself, we've been in Wi-Fi for probably too many years. We're focusing on the Wi-Fi access point in the cloud. Most of our team members are in Ottawa, in Canada. And aside from being a TIP member and working and contributing to TIP technologies, we're also providing a commercial platform compatible with TIP open Wi-Fi. And that's kind of allowing multi-vendor hardware and it allows kind of like a productization of a service based on Wi-Fi. In those situations when a service provider or the client decides that they would like to use more than one hardware vendor. The architecture of the open Wi-Fi system is, I mean, probably not very dissimilar to the traditional architecture, modern architecture in Wi-Fi. You'll notice a couple of differences, maybe 2 or 3 differences. One is on the left-hand side where you see the tip AP, over there you'll see many names. So in the ecosystem, and anybody can join the Open Wi-Fi project if they are interested. So right now there are probably about, I think on the order of 8 or 9, if not more, hardware vendors which are contributing and are part of this. Like always, when you have an ecosystem, probably about 4 or 5 of them are a little bit more active, and the other ones are sort of coming together. So the fact that there is an opportunity to mix and match hardware is a little bit different. Perhaps related to the hardware diversity, perhaps also related to the fact that it's an end-to-end architecture, you'll see also a variety of use cases which are compatible with the same architecture in Wi-Fi. Many times we've been used to, oh, this is a residential architecture with a residential type of control, and this is a high-end enterprise for the highest end universities or financial institutions and need a different type of architecture. And then maybe there is an architecture for SMB and so on. Once you have an architecture which is supported by an ecosystem, you can create an ability to deliver multiple use cases from the same architecture. And that starts to mimic a little bit cellular. In the cellular domain, you're not going to say, wow, I'm going to put all my business customers on an Ericsson 5G, and then I'm going to put all my residential customers on whatever, Nokia or somebody else's 5G. If it's a well-thought architecture, you would think that they would be able to support multiple use cases. And in the case of this telecom infra project, Open Wi-Fi, it seems to be the case. The third kind of change or maybe difference you're going to see, you'll see towards the right side in that cloud icon, there is an API. So the API is a border between kind of like free software to the left and an application layer that anybody can develop. And we're developing one, but I'm sure in due course there will be other companies which are going to provide a plethora of applications compatible with the Open Wi-Fi free software. In terms of ourselves as a company, we have kind of a dual role. On one hand, we are contributors both on the access point side and on the Cloud SDK. Cloud SDK is a thin layer of software on the cloud which abstracts the access point and the hardware from the cloud. So we're a contributor and also a coordinator for some of these activities. And then also we have kind of an end-to-end platform compatible with Open Wi-Fi, which we sell to service providers. The access point software is a full-featured access point, which would be similar to the enterprise class of access point. It's not done only by us. The beauty of it, it's a community effort. So we are right now in more of a coordinating role, but we have our own design team contributing to the AP, but also there is a team in Germany, there is a team in Croatia, there is a team in Slovenia, there is a team in US. So it's a community effort, which is making it extremely fast and also extremely innovative. Looking at the architecture in a different way, and that also reflects a little bit on our audience in terms of the opportunity, is when you have at the bottom, you would have hardware from several vendors, and it could be, indoor, outdoor, hospitality APs, in-wall units, embedded hardware or Wi-Fi into another kind of device and so on. Then on top of that, you have an AP network operation, operating system. So that's kind of like the common software, which is against common specifications on the hardware side, which is kind of like normalizing all these products into something which is manageable and controllable from the same suite of cloud applications. And then it goes into either bare metal on somebody's data center, or it can go into a public cloud such as Amazon or Microsoft or Google. And then on top of that, we have the TIP SDK, software development kit, which is providing the abstraction layer. And then, innovation and creativity is endless on top. So somebody can go and figure out applications for, for advertising, as it was presented a moment ago. I'm sure there will be maybe customized applications, perhaps vertical, perhaps bringing different type of hardware into the fold and so on. What we provide in our own platform, it's a controller side, the management side, the analytics side, QoE engine, QoE. Several colleagues who spoke before mentioned QoE, and totally share the view that, an enlarged view of QoE is what the industry needs to focus on right now. There are so many aspects to focus on QoE, and the network is just one side of it. Automation, very, very important as a driver of QoE, security, and on and on and on. A word or two about, we don't make any hardware, but a word or two about hardware compatibility. It's really allowing, when you have a common set of requirements, and then you have multiple hardware vendors able to contribute with their own hardware, it creates a very powerful superset portfolio. And you can have relatively fast a combination of kind of like generations of technology, 5, 6, 6E, variety in the types of indoor, outdoor, with external antenna, without external antenna, with this and that. You can have kind of like cards, which are part of maybe smart poles or many other applications. You can have the specialty, and a couple of my colleagues outlined some opportunities for specialty type of combinations of CBRS and Wi-Fi. But also, if you're a large service provider, it's this kind of like interesting thought of like bring your own vendor, as long as the vendor is willing to comply with the specifications of the architecture, can get in. Bring your own hardware, bring your own type of hardware. So that's one thing which I found very thought-provoking and also interesting in this journey, in my 4th journey in Wi-Fi, and very, very keen to see this kind of like come to fruition. I think Bob was mentioning before the role of technologies like AI. So what's called in the industry the radio resource management, which is kind of in a way the brain behind a good chunk of the quality of experience. It's very important. It's also tends to be very complicated. Like what you see on the top right-hand side is when our engineers were playing with the relationships between clients and access points. What you see there is a very small network. I can't remember, it was 5 access points, or for sure it was less than 10 access points. Well, there is no brain big enough to go and figure out what's going on there. But if you ingest that information into the cloud, you run it into some machine learning algorithms, you sweat those algorithms to figure out if they are kind of like until they are working very well, that can be very, very helpful. The other key component is automation. These networks are becoming super complicated, multi-generation of Wi-Fi, multiple use cases. Some of them are kind of like mission critical, like having the cloud itself being a repository of all the information, be able not only to provide alarms to people, to technicians or engineers, but also try to figure out on its own what's going on, try to figure out the root cause of a certain situation, try to mitigate when possible, is going to be also key to the future, and it's part of what we do. And then with this open Wi-Fi, like many of us have presented innovation in many different ways, there are some milestones which are, promoted by and driven by open Wi-Fi. So you have, all of a sudden, you have a cloud controller for automation, which is able to manage multi-vendor hardware. So that has implications which are positive in areas such as cost, the size of a portfolio to choose from, operational efficiency, and so on. Also, you have the same kind of like cloud controller and automation, which is able to support multiple use cases. So on the same system, you can put maybe sort of an MDU, which would be one form of a residential kind of a use case. And next to it could be users, which would be in the university next door, which typically would be served by a different type of system. And then there are milestones related to, this is not like one company like us, kind of like pushing the bus. This is kind of like an ecosystem journey. And what's interesting is to see the service providers and the technology providers coming together and contributing to specifications and ideas. So the old mindset of, let's say, a service providers going and kind of like ranking technology partners and say, well, I like your products more and I like your products less. In the context of an ecosystem, it becomes a much more collaborative project. So kind of like in summary, that's what we do. We're contributors to the Open Wi-Fi TIP project. We're also providing an end-to-end platform for service providers to deliver managed Wi-Fi services. And my email address is there. Anybody would like to follow up. I don't think we have a lot of time now because we're a little bit late, which is the reason I try to go fast. If there are any questions, reach out to me on my email. Thank you. Steve?
Sorry, yeah. One question here, Bernard, sorry. But somebody's asking about the timeline for open Wi-Fi and if it just applies to large service providers. So maybe could you take a stab at that question, please?
It's a very, very good questions. So no, it doesn't apply only to large service providers. Actually, we're working now. The ecosystem has kind of like specialty kind of service providers, and some of them I'm 100% convinced that they are part of the WBA because I know them, and some of them are larger. So it can be a solution for an MSP which has, let's say, a small number of customers. It's a solution which could be for a very large service provider. And the reason for that, it's an architecture, and the cloud side, it's completely scalable and it's multi-tenant and it's elastic. So if you deploy, let's say, on Amazon, you don't run out of compute power. And if you architect it well, then you don't create kind of like bottlenecks, which would prevent the system from scaling to a certain size. In terms of timeline, so trials are starting with a fairly substantial number of service providers this quarter, and the architecture and the system is going to go into deployment next year.
Okay, perfect. Okay, thank you. So We're going to switch or change up a little bit. We're going to have or move to our panel session next. So Bernard, I'm going to ask you to stay up on the virtual stage as such, and then I'm going to ask also Blaise and Jonas to come back. And we also have Yang Yi from Huawei, who's VP for Campus Networks, that will join us next as well. Okay. Yeah, so just moving forward, so just a little bit to just sort of set the scene and the backdrop here. We've talked a lot about the transforming public and guest Wi-Fi. We've heard, from a lot of speakers today. I think the panel also, or the poll rather, showed us what was important in terms of user onboarding. However, we still, I see a struggle between finding that right balance for easier user onboarding and seamless roaming, and then what the venue actually intended that network for. Blaise, I think you spoke about it during your presentation as well, and what they wanted it for in terms of brand awareness, digital engagement, and analytics. So again, we are fortunate to have this panel here with extensive experience across operators, service providers, enterprise, residential, and so forth. Let's sort of take our first question. A question is the largest positives that you see in terms of the various aspects that make up the ecosystem. So we're talking about the different players, the industry collaborations, coexistence with other technologies. But what have been the largest positives that you've seen to date? That question first will go to Blaise, as I think you talked about it in your presentation a bit as well. Okay.
Yeah, I think that it's been a theme throughout the course of the day, right? It's an ecosystem movement, and there are a lot of parts that need to come together: device manufacturers, operating system, folks who manage the operating systems, the OEMs with equipment, and then the folks who are doing network design and implementation, right? And it's I think everybody's kind of coalescing around this latest, latest kind of generation of technology, Passpoint, Wi-Fi 6, understanding that the demands on data consumption are continuing on this exponential curve that never seems to flatten out. And we're getting to the point now where there is just a lot more collaboration and communication, honestly, across vendors and partners and competitors. Very much an environment of co-opetition, but everybody realizing that the opportunity to grow this and make business, from the growth is dependent on cooperation, not just necessarily closing the shop and trying to, solve the world's problems by yourself. So I think that's been probably the biggest, the biggest benefit.
Thank you. And Bernard, we heard from you there as well in terms of open Wi-Fi, but could you also comment?
Sure. So as I mentioned a moment ago, kind of the big pluses that we see, and echoing a little bit to Blaise, is kind of the community and the ecosystem. Wi-Fi, I don't think it's going to be one ecosystem. It seems to be an ecosystem of ecosystems. So open roaming is one powerful ecosystem. Open Wi-Fi is another one. I'm sure there are more. They will be coming together, and we all want the same thing. What we want is a more vibrant Wi-Fi industry and QoE, quality of experience, for the clients. So from our vantage point, the common specifications, the compatibility with multiple hardware, the community effort to innovate, and kind of like the end-to-end approach that we see right now are huge positives.
Okay, thank you, Bernard. And Jonas, could you also lend us your view from an absolute sort of service provider perspective?
I agree with Bernard's last words. Huge positives. I think aren't we in a better place than we've been in a very long time with new spectrum available. We have latest version of Wi-Fi significantly better than the previous one, and then we have these ecosystems coming together. Like Blaise said, we're working together, and we have, I think, finally some improvements on the handsets as well. They are getting Passpoint ready. There's the Captive Portal API now in iOS and Android, the latest versions, which helps us communicate to the user in a more streamlined way. We've been suffering with the poor CNA browser user experience for many years now, and all of a sudden now we can control that experience in a better way and choose when to launch a browser and when not to, and be more seamless in the user experience. So there are a lot of factors coming together. From the cellular industry with 5G, I think there's a increased understanding and acceptance that these technologies work together. So that's also driving the interest in Wi-Fi and helping everybody create better services. So I think we're in a better place than we've been for many, many years in this community.
Okay. And thank you, Jonas. And finally, to Yang, welcome again. But could you also give us your perspective from Huawei? So really sort of the positives that you've seen in terms of the various aspects of the ecosystems.
Of course. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. As Wi-Fi vendors, the development of industry depends on the joint efforts of the upstream and downstream of the industry. For example, Wi-Fi 6, Huawei is only just as a device vendor and provides connection device such as Wi-Fi access points and switches. But however, only device vendors are not enough. If no terminal vendor provides Wi-Fi 6 terminals and application vendors provides the high bandwidth applications such as AR and VR, and I believe that they cannot push the Wi-Fi 6 have support the new technology, new protocol, and to have a high bandwidth and make a low latency. So only the joint efforts of the chip vendors, the terminal vendors, the device vendors, and the application providers can promote and drive the development of the Wi-Fi 6 and make users accept it as soon as possible. So therefore, I think the most important factor is the joint cooperation of the industry chain and the ecosystems. So which is very valuable to the users. So all the things is based on the cooperation, and our target is to how to improve and how to make the users have the good experience. And so the most important, the most positive factor is the application, is the user as a center of the user experience, and each vendors and each providers can provide the best service to the end user. So this is my opinion. Okay.
Okay. Thank you, Yang. Okay. And staying on this topic, actually, I want to bring open roaming into the equation. And obviously, we heard from Matthew McPherson and from Raj Gujrani at the start of the session as well. So the question here is really sort of how do you guys see open roaming playing a part in the ecosystem and fixing some of these challenges that we've heard about today? So let's go around again. So let's start with Blaise. Back to you.
Yeah, I think open roaming is just an implementation of technology that's been around, in a while. I think Cisco's done a nice job of kind of shepherding it through and building it into a solution, and then turning it over really to the WBA to make it an ecosystem measure as opposed to a vendor specific measure. I think that was huge. It's the promotion of the technologies. It's the expression of what you can do with Passpoint, with RadSec as an interconnect technology to make it simpler, right? To really kind of make it easier, as Matt said in his presentation, easier for venues to participate, right? And so it's, I think that there's not so much a technology evolution inside of open roaming as much as it was an organizational move to bring these things to light and really organize the ecosystem through the WBA behind it.
Okay, thank you. And I want to ask Bernard the same question, but also Bernard, maybe because we had some of the folks from the TIP Wi-Fi come over in the summer and present and talk about open roaming as well, and how the two things can work cohesively together. But could you lend us your view on this one from an open Wi-Fi perspective as well, and how open roaming is playing?
I think open roaming is highly complementary with open Wi-Fi, and my expectation is that a good system should take advantage of both. I think open roaming, like a little bit echoing Blas, it's good for service providers. It builds brands, it does offload, it's good for venue providers, it provides some money, but also very important, it's good for end users because there are fewer clicks. And what we all learned from Apple is if you can save a few clicks, that becomes very, very valuable. And the whole thing, I think many of us were saying, well, the whole thing, it's about quality of experience. Well, quality of experience is not only increase the speed by 3 times. Quality of experience, if the speed is high, but if you cannot connect it, and if it's fussy to connect, that's not a good quality of experience. And I think open roaming is going to be one of the building blocks, which is going to be good for the future.
Okay, thank you. Jonas, as well, from an Aptilo perspective, it'd be good to understand how you see open roaming playing from a service provider perspective, but also conscious of what Aptilo is doing in the IoT space. So maybe you could lend a view there as well.
I think Aptilo supports open roaming strongly. Especially from a user experience, like Bernard was saying there, with the both simplify and make user experience more secure and make users more secure. I think those are the biggest aspects. And with the now we didn't get the full Mac randomization in the latest device releases, but that's coming. Like it's been mentioned previously. Open roaming, offers a way to and Passpoint offers a way to authenticate and identify devices without having to care about the MAC address, which is very useful and fits well. So definitely something that we will recommend our service provider customers to make use of and deploy in their networks. Sure. And IoT is a good point. Yeah, that was your second part of the question. Yeah, why not? Why not? Let's use open roaming infrastructure to connect also IoT devices. It sounds like a good idea, and that's something we've been discussing, and how to add it to the open roaming initiative is really looking forward to do that.
Yeah, I know we heard from SDataway over the summer as well. They came in and it was interesting, I think, for anything from the coffee machine and how that could be leveraged from a seamless roaming perspective. And I think we'd all appreciate that as well. As
long as we get the device vendors on board, it's all good. We're going to make it work.
Yep.
And that's happening. So that's good news.
Okay. Yang Ji, so same question to you. So just as a refresh, in terms of open roaming and how you see it, I guess, playing a part in the ecosystem and fixing some of the challenges that we see today. Could you lend your view?
Yes, we see that the people have higher requirement on the Wi-Fi experience. That everyone cannot live Wi-Fi everywhere, and so the high bandwidth and the low latency of Wi-Fi are designed to improve user experience, and not only just for the bandwidth, for the latency. It is also needed everywhere. We need Wi-Fi. We cannot live Wi-Fi. So a device vendor can solve the roaming problems in its own Wi-Fi system, such as the internal access point roaming and the inter WAC roaming. But the open roaming is a good technology for the roaming between the Wi-Fi and the cellular networks. So we are focusing on this technology, and also we are supported in the very short time. So we believe that open roaming is a very good to service each guys, and everywhere can make sure that to improve the experience of the end users. So I believe that it is really important. Okay. Thank you.
Good. what we're going to do next is get the audience questions in as a next step as well. So rather than me ask, we want to hear what the audience has to say as well. So again, audience, if you have any questions, please use the question functionality. There is one here that I'm going to ask, and it is changing tracks a little bit. So what it's asking is Wi-Fi is often spoken about as a competing technology to other access technologies and standards such as cellular mobile, or a converging technology which can coexist. So what have each of you experienced from your perspectives on this topic of convergence versus competition, and any examples that you can share? So very good question, I think. Let's go around. So Bernard, could you go first, please?
Okay. The first thing I would say is I think I heard this question 20 years ago when Wi-Fi was 1 megabit per second, and cellular, I can't remember if it was GSM or it was probably was not even 3G. And every year you hear the same thing. The fact is cellular and Wi-Fi are highly complementary. And if there is kind of like an issue is, it's just taking it forever to make them kind of like work well together. But I think they are going to stay completely complementary because they are trying to solve things and they are optimized for different use cases. We just have to make this interoperability between Wi-Fi and cellular, faster. We have to implement it faster because I remember that too many years.
Yeah, similarly, it's been a theme for sure. So, okay, thank you. And Yang, could you lend your perspective as well, please?
Of course, I believe that this is an interesting question for Huawei, because as you know that Huawei also it is focused on the 5G technologies and products and solution. So when that Wi-Fi 6 was popularized last year, many people, including the analysts and customers, ask me how Huawei Wireless the relationship between the 5G and the Wi-Fi 6. We are always answered like that. We believe that these two technologies are complementary. So 5G is mainly used in outdoor scenarios, and the Wi-Fi 6 is mainly used in outdoor scenarios. Currently, and the 5G 2B services are mainly used in some scenarios that such as the remote, the telemedical, and maybe some remote mining, and which scenarios which is focused on the high latency requirements, and also some uplink and high uplink bandwidth. So these scenarios, maybe some is not suitable for Wi-Fi 6, but actually in this year some project also at Huawei we are worked on the 5G CPE as a hospital increase of the uplink transmission, and Huawei Wi-Fi 6 is used inside the hospital as a cover the building. So in addition, Wi-Fi and IoT and some we can be well integrated, and Huawei Wi-Fi access points can function as IoT gateways and support technologies such as RFID, Zigbee, and Bluetooth. So currently, Wi-Fi network will carry most important service, and the service experience needs to be considered based on the network, the user experience. So Huawei use different technologies such as antenna and some chipsets, and the AI technology to achieve different completely, such as high bandwidth, low latency, zero packet loss, and IoT convergence. So at the same time, Huawei can integrate with other technologies. So we think Wi-Fi is a network technology that can be integrated with other technologies, including the 5G and IoT and such other different technologies. So, but it needs more vendors and more providers can work together. And so as Huawei, we are open, and we also positive to work with other vendors. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Great answer, actually. And whilst we were speaking, another related question on this came in. So I'll put it back to you, Janggi. But the question here is about whether there are use cases where the two technologies, cellular and Wi-Fi, can be used together simultaneously. So do you want to have a stab at that one? Or?
So, okay, you mean set some examples?
Yeah, so yeah, if there are any use cases where the two technologies, so yes, any use cases that you can think of.
Yes, for example, in China, we deployed just in some hospital, just I mentioned that for the 5G CPE as an uplink, and the one as a one uplink to the as a 5G uplink, and the downlink is as a based on the Wi-Fi 6 technology. So in some hospital, we already deployed some projects, and also in some factory, and in some factory, and in the when some manufacture some device, and we also based on the Wi-Fi 6 and 5G, but we use some for example low latency scenarios. They deploy the 5G and as a CPE to connect with 5G CPE to connect with the 5G, but some another scenarios maybe it is not so frequently to remove. We only based on the Wi-Fi 6. For example, in China we have some the company which manufacture the cars, and we already deployed such scenarios. So 5G and Wi-Fi 6, we believe that we can based on some different requirements and based on the different scenarios, and we provide the different solution. So, okay.
Thank you. Okay. Jonas, could you lend us your view as well?
I think I can give you an example. We've this year we've launched a connectivity control service for primarily focused on cellular networks for mobile operators, a service towards them. And when we talk to them about that, in almost every conversation, we are also talking about bringing Wi-Fi in. So combining the two technologies for IoT purposes is very interesting to them. So that's in the IoT use case is an obvious one, because you will have the multitude of devices indoor and outdoor that it's really interesting to have them connected as one and brought back to the enterprise to use for the IoT based services. So okay. Their convergence is an obvious one.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, and then I put the same question to Blaise. So any use cases, but also your any experiences how you're seeing the technologies converge.
I think you see it kind of all over the place, right? There's working groups that are focused around convergence at the RAN level, not just the kind of the network level. There are properties and networks being built out with both Wi-Fi and cellular radios throughout. The kind of the introduction in the states of CBRS and the unlicensed opportunity is opening the doors for private cellular networks, and so it just we see it as completely complementary, right? There are certain use cases that lend themselves and are natural and easy to implement, for the respective technologies, and we see that in pretty much every property network design that we do. It is very much about identity, seamless transition, as long as those things are working well for users, as long as the IoT functions that they expect to have, if those are on cellular or some alternate wireless technology, are available to them as a primarily Wi-Fi network user, that they don't really care. And so that's really, I like to see what's going on in terms of the collaboration in the ecosystem and what the OEM partners and TIP and others are doing to kind of embrace that.
Okay, and Well, I was going to close it out, but with the way you ended it there, Blake, I'm tempted to go back to Bernard and see if he can answer. So.
Well, I think you're going to see, like, the tip. If the question is about the tip ecosystem already has projects which are cellular projects and Wi-Fi projects, and actually not even wireless projects. So they are trying to encompass a kind of like a broad spectrum of networking technologies. I'm convinced that they will be tied together, because kind of like echoing Blas, like my view is like, first of all, we have to have the basics work. Like where I'm presenting from my house now, I have marginal cellular coverage, but I have very strong Wi-Fi. But I have to put my iPhone on airplane mode. Otherwise, it jumps on cellular, which is marginal, and it drops the call. That would be the first thing that you would want to fix the basics. And then you'll have sophistication added on later. That would be my view.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so we are now at the end. We're up on time. Big thank you from WBA and from the audience to all the panelists here as well. Yeah, much appreciated. I think a lot of food for thought. We've covered a lot. Just to summarize, I think there's, throughout the panel session from the speakers, work in progress to still create that perfect user experience and balance between, I guess, what the venue or operator wants and what the user desires as well. I heard from each of you what you're planning on doing, on how you're addressing some of those challenges as well. I also heard about open roaming and how you plan to move forward as well with some of the developments in the broader ecosystem. So again, much appreciated. Thank you. If we were together physically, I'd love to go and buy you all a beer, but you'll have to take a rain check on that till hopefully sometime in 2021, and take a virtual beer instead. So thank you. And next, I'd like to hand over to the WBA CEO, Tiago Rodriguez. He has a few words just to add in the end and some closing remarks. So Tiago, over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Steve. Thank you, everyone, for the wonderful session. To be honest, it's been fantastic 4 days. We talked about the European regulatory environment for the telecoms. We mentioned Wi-Fi 6, 6E, Wi-Fi 7. We had today a fantastic discussion about public and guest Wi-Fi, IoT, all these new concepts, open roaming, open Wi-Fi, how to address the enterprise Wi-Fi market. Definitely has been very rich content. And at the same time, we had our industry awards last week. So for once more, to all the winners, a big congratulations. And I would like just to spend 1 minute on our events for 2021. As we all know, this pandemic makes our events a little bit challenging. So we are planning for the next quarter, the first quarter in 2021, we go with a virtual event. But we are, and I hope that everything goes well. And by the second quarter, by June timeframe, we can have some kind of hybrid model for our events where some of us probably can meet together face to face, and some can join remotely. So fingers crossed that the pandemic somehow gets better and we can have some kind of face-to-face time between all of us. Our event for the fall in October timeframe, 1 year from now, is still work in progress, but as soon as we have more information, we'll share. And I will leave the message, so anyone that will be interested in being part of our events, either as a speaker or a sponsor, please get involved, reach out to us. We'll be more than happy to give you more details and have your brand and your company involved. Just to finalize, another big thank you to all the sponsors of the Virtual Wireless Global Congress. Without you, without your support, we could not have this event. So a big thank you to all of you. And the final message, last slide, it's really just to share. Next Monday, we'll start to release the replays of the webinars. So if by whatever reason you missed one of the sessions or you'd like to share with your colleagues the webinars, recordings will be available and you can share with anyone. So we are way beyond the hour that we planned. I want to give a big thank you to all the speakers we had today. A great session, but as well to all the attendees and everyone that made possible this event. Thank you, everyone, and have a great rest of the day. Thank you.
Thanks. Cheers.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.